Hey friends, around 70% of viewers who watch my videos haven't subscribed yet. If you enjoy the content, please consider subscribing. It would truly mean a lot to me. Also, don't forget to hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps the videos reach more people and really helps the channel grow. Thank you so much. Let me know in the comments which city or country are you watching from. I was driving through the night on a stretch of highway that seemed endless. The road was flat, straight, and surrounded by miles of open fields and patches of forest. My rig, a big old semi with a worn-out sleeper cab, rumbled beneath me like an old beast waking up. The hum of the engine and the rhythmic thud of tires on the asphalt were the only sounds filling the quiet night air. This route was one I'd done plenty of times before, hauling refrigerated goods from the Midwest to the West Coast. But every time out here alone, there was a quiet that felt heavy, like the world was holding its breath. The highway was mostly empty, and the sky above was clear. The stars were sharp and bright, scattered across the dark like tiny lamps. Occasionally, I'd see the distant glow of a small town's lights, but mostly it was just me and the road. I kept an eye on the gauges on the dashboard: fuel, oil pressure, temperature, making sure everything was running smooth. The rig was old but dependable, a machine I trusted with my life, and I'd spent enough hours behind the wheel to know every rattle and hum. At around 2 in the morning, I pulled into a rest stop just off the highway. These stops were important for drivers like me. They were a chance to stretch, grab some coffee, and reset before the next leg. The parking lot was mostly empty, but a few rigs were parked around, their drivers probably sleeping or getting something to eat inside the small diner. I parked my truck, locked the doors, and climbed out, feeling the cool night air hit me hard. The silence was deep, except for the distant murmur of a highway radio from another truck. I leaned back against my rig and looked up at the sky. Sometimes, when I was out here alone, the stillness would press in on me. It wasn't scary, just heavy, like a weight that settled in your chest. I was tired, physically and mentally, but the road didn't stop just because I was worn out. There were miles to cover and schedules to keep. The trucking life was a grind, no doubt about it. After a short break, I got back behind the wheel and rolled back onto the highway. The engine's growl filled the cab again, and I shifted into gear, feeling the rig respond. The road ahead was empty, but my mind was busy. I thought about the next delivery, the paperwork waiting for me at the dock, the family I missed at home. Driving long hours like this, the highway becomes more than just a route. It's a place where your thoughts run free, sometimes too free. A few hours later, the first light of dawn was creeping over the horizon. The sky slowly turned from black to shades of deep blue and pink. I could see the landscape better now, rolling hills, a few farms, and patches of forest. The air was fresher than it had been during the night, and there was a quiet calmness that morning brought. I rolled the window down a bit to let some cool air in. The smell of wet earth and dew made the cab feel alive. Driving through a small town at sunrise, I saw a diner with a few early risers sitting at the counter. The sign was faded, but it looked like the kind of place that had been around forever, the kind you'd stop at if you had time. I didn't stop this time, but I made a mental note to try it next trip. These towns were the heartbeat of the country, little pockets of life in the vast stretches of road. As the morning wore on, I passed through rolling farmland, where the fields were already busy with tractors and workers. The sun was fully up now, warm and bright. The road twisted and turned more here, and I had to be sharp, watching out for slow-moving vehicles and farm equipment crossing. I adjusted my speed carefully, making sure the load stayed secure. The refrigerated trailer hummed behind me, keeping the cargo cold. This was a load of fresh produce heading to a market in the city. The company counted on me to deliver it fresh and on time. By mid-morning, I reached a busy stretch near a city. The highway was crowded now with cars, trucks, and commuters heading to work. The pace was faster, the traffic heavier. Maneuvering my rig through this mess took focus and patience. I had to constantly scan mirrors, signal early, and keep a safe distance. The city outskirts were noisy with construction sites, billboards, and the constant drone of engines. It was a sharp contrast to the quiet I had just left behind. Near noon, I stopped at a truck stop for fuel and a quick bite. These stops were lifelines, the place to rest, refuel, and check on the rig. The fuel pump hissed as I filled the tank. Inside, the place smelled of diesel, coffee, and fried food. I grabbed a sandwich and some water, then checked my logbook and paperwork. Everything was in order so far, and the delivery time was still on track. Back on the road, the afternoon sun was high and hot. The cab felt stuffy, and I kept the AC running. The miles ticked by, each one a small victory in the long haul. I passed through small towns, fields, and stretches of highway that looked the same but always had little differences. A new barn here, a different billboard there. The monotony was part of the job, but it gave time to think, plan, and just be with the road. As the day turned to evening, I was closing in on the destination. The highway started climbing into low hills, and the landscape changed again. Trees grew taller and denser. The air cooled down, and the shadows lengthened. The rig felt heavy as I made my way through these last few miles. I checked the GPS, confirming the final exit for the warehouse. When I finally pulled into the loading dock, the place was buzzing with activity. Forklifts moved pallets around, and workers unloaded other trucks. I parked the rig and stepped out, feeling a mix of relief and accomplishment. Unloading the cargo would take some time, but it was the last task before I could rest. After the load was off, I filled out the paperwork, signed the delivery confirmation, and finally shut down the engine. The day had been long, and the work hard, but everything had gone smoothly. I took a moment to look around. The warehouse was busy, the trucks coming and going like a steady pulse. The smell of diesel and fresh produce lingered in the air. Walking back to my truck, I felt the weight of the day settle in. The long hours, the focus, the miles, it all came together in moments like this. I climbed into the cab, set the heater for the night, and settled into the worn seat. Tomorrow I would be back on the road again, but for now there was rest. I thought about the family waiting for me at home, the small things I missed while away. Dinners, quiet nights, and just being there. The trucking life was tough, lonely sometimes, but it was honest work. The road was a part of me as much as the rig itself. As I closed my eyes, the engine ticking softly as it cooled, I knew I had done my job well today. The miles behind me told a story of grit and routine, of challenges met and passed. It was a good day's work, and that was all I could ask for. Tomorrow would bring a new route, new roads, and new miles to cover. But for now, I was home on the road, and that was enough. I had been on the road for close to 16 hours when I pulled off the interstate near a small rest stop. The sky was a thick gray, heavy with clouds that promised rain, and the cold had crept into the truck cab like an unwelcome guest. My rig was an older model, but solid, a Freightliner that had seen better days but kept pushing on. The diesel engine was still warm under the hood, but my bones were tired and my eyes heavy. I needed a break before the long haul across the mountain pass. The rest stop was quiet. Just a few trucks parked under flickering yellow lights that did little to cut the gloom. I slid the big door open and stepped out into the damp chill. The air smelled faintly of wet asphalt mixed with exhaust fumes and pine from the nearby trees. I stretched, feeling the stiffness in my legs from sitting so long. My boots hit the cold concrete with a dull thud as I walked toward the small convenience store beside the parking lot. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. I grabbed a cup of coffee from the machine, bitter, black, and strong, just the way I liked it. I moved slowly, knowing I had to keep my eyes open for the next few hours, especially through the mountains where the roads could get slick and dangerous in the cold. The clerk was an older man who looked like he had spent a lifetime behind the counter. He barely glanced up as I paid, and I didn't bother to say anything. Back outside, the rain had started lightly, soft drops that quickly turned into a steady drizzle. I climbed back into the cab, shutting the door against the weather, and turned on the heater. The warmth slowly fought off the cold creeping from the windows and the floor. I pulled out my phone to check the weather ahead. The forecast wasn't great, rain all the way through the pass, and temperatures close to freezing. That meant ice on the roads, which always made me tense. The trucks ahead of me would be crawling slow, and I'd have to be patient. I set the heater to a steady hum and leaned back, sipping my coffee. The soft sound of rain tapping on the roof was oddly calming. There was a strange peace in the loneliness of the road sometimes. Hours of just the steady drone of the engine, the endless stretch of asphalt, and the occasional flicker of lights from other trucks and cars. But it was tiring, wearing down the mind and body in ways most people wouldn't understand. After what felt like a short rest, I started the engine again and eased the rig back onto the highway. The wet roads gleamed under the headlights, reflecting the dull yellow of the street lamps and the dark shapes of the trees that lined the highway. I stayed alert, keeping a close eye on the mirrors for any signs of trouble. Trucks often had blind spots, and in this weather, it was easy to miss a fast-moving car or a sudden patch of ice. The climb up the mountain began slowly. The grade was steep in places, and I had to shift gears carefully to keep the RPM steady without losing traction. The road narrowed, and the rain turned heavier, the windshield wipers working overtime to keep the view clear. I could see brake lights ahead, slow-moving rigs inching their way upward. We all knew what lay ahead. A long stretch of winding road with tight curves and no room for error. The temperature dropped further. My breath fogged the windows despite the heater. I kept my gloves on tight and gripped the steering wheel firmly. The truck felt heavy, almost sluggish, like it was fighting the cold and the weight of the cargo in the trailer behind me. Every now and then, a gust of wind would rock the rig slightly, reminding me how exposed we were up here. As I rounded one particularly sharp curve, I spotted a semi that had pulled over to the side of the road. Its hazard lights blinked, casting a dull orange glow in the rain. I slowed and checked my mirrors. There was no sign of the driver. The scene made me uneasy. Sometimes, when trucks broke down in spots like this, drivers would wait inside or walk a short way to find help. But this rig looked abandoned. I kept moving, careful not to get distracted. The road was slippery, and the last thing I needed was to lose control. The rain blurred the world outside, and the white lines marking the edge of the pavement sometimes vanished under puddles and wet leaves. I could feel my heartbeat steady but tense. This was what I hated about mountain driving. Not the physical effort but the mental strain of constant attention. Near the summit, the rain began to change into sleet. Ice crystals formed on the windshield, and the wipers struggled to clear the view. I hit the defrost button and increased the heat. The truck's engine groaned as I shifted down into a lower gear to keep control. My tires gripped the road, but I could sense the thin layer of ice underneath. I slowed even more and kept a wide berth around the trucks ahead. The rest of the descent was slow and cautious. The road twisted and turned sharply, and patches of ice appeared without warning. I followed the tracks left by the truck ahead, hoping they were safer. The brakes needed a gentle touch to avoid skidding, and I downshifted often to use engine braking. Hours later, the rain finally stopped as I reached the valley below. The air was warmer, and the road dried quickly. I pulled off at a truck stop to refuel and stretch again. The place was busy this time, with drivers swapping stories, laughing, and grabbing food. I didn't join them. Instead, I sat in the cab and ate a sandwich I had packed earlier, savoring the quiet after the tense drive. That night, parked under the bright lights of the truck stop, I thought about the long day behind me. The road had tested me, wet highways, mountain curves, ice, and the weight of the rig, but I had kept control. I had stayed alert when it mattered, and now I was safe. The truck was my home for many hours, sometimes days, and I treated it like a living thing, listening to its sounds, feeling its vibrations, and trusting it to get me where I needed to go. The next morning, I woke early, the sky clear and cold. I checked the rig, made sure everything was in order, and planned the next leg of the trip. The long haul continued, but for now I was ready. The road was demanding, but it gave me purpose, and I was determined to see it through 1 mile at a time. I had been on the road for nearly 15 hours when I finally pulled into the last rest stop before my final destination. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the highway, and the air was cooling down after a hot day. My rig was heavy with a load of construction materials, and the engine hummed steadily as I coasted into the parking lot. It had been a long haul from the industrial park outside the city to this remote stretch of highway, and the miles seemed to drag on endlessly. The highway out here was a lonely stretch with little more than trees on either side. The radio in the cab was mostly static, the signal fading in and out as I moved farther from the city. I glanced over the gauges on the dashboard. Fuel was good, oil pressure steady, tires holding strong. The truck was my life on the road, and every part of it mattered. I shut down the engine and climbed out, stretching my legs. The rest stop was quiet but clean, with just a few other trucks parked under the dim lights. I grabbed my bag and headed inside to the small diner, the smell of coffee and fried food greeting me as I stepped through the door. I ordered a burger and fries, not because I was hungry but more for the routine of it. The waitress poured me a cup of black coffee, and I sat by the window watching the trucks come and go. After eating, I stepped back outside. The night was dark now, but the stars were bright and sharp. I took a deep breath, feeling the cold air fill my lungs. The quiet was different from the city noise I was used to. Here, the only sounds were the rustling leaves and the distant hum of cars on the highway. I checked my phone, no signal. That was normal out here. The isolation was part of the job, part of what made long-haul trucking both a challenge and a kind of peace. No distractions, no one to answer to except the road and the clock. I climbed back into the cab and settled in. The truck's interior was worn but comfortable. The leather seat had a few cracks, and the dashboard showed the scars of many miles, but everything was in working order. I flicked on the headlights and pulled back onto the highway. The road stretched ahead like a ribbon of black and white, the lines glowing under the headlights. As I drove, I thought about the delivery waiting for me. A new apartment complex on the edge of town. They had scheduled my drop-off for early morning, so I still had time to get some rest at the company lot before unloading. I was glad for that. These long hauls were draining, and every hour of sleep counted. The highway was empty except for a few cars now and then. I kept a steady pace, eyes on the road, hands steady on the wheel. Around midnight, I passed a small diner with a few cars parked out front, lights shining brightly in the darkness. I thought about stopping for a quick break, but decided against it. The clock was ticking, and I needed to keep moving. A few miles later, I noticed something on the shoulder. A car, parked awkwardly, its hazard lights blinking. I slowed down, keeping my distance. There was no one around. I kept driving. It was not unusual to see stranded vehicles on this stretch of road, but I had learned long ago not to stop in isolated places unless it was an emergency. The road curved ahead, trees closing in closer. The moon peeked through the branches, casting eerie shadows on the asphalt. I stayed alert, watching for deer or any other animals. This part of the highway was known for wildlife crossing at night. Suddenly, my headlights caught movement on the side of the road. A figure was walking slowly, carrying something bulky. It was hard to make out in the dark, but something about the way they moved felt off. I kept my speed steady, eyes flicking between the road and the figure. As I passed, I noticed the person was wearing a reflective vest, but their posture was slouched, almost exhausted. I glanced in the rearview mirror as I moved past, and the figure stopped walking, standing still by the trees. I thought about calling the company to report it, but my phone was still dead. The highway had a patchy signal at best. I decided to keep going. It was late and I needed to stay on schedule. The next stretch of road was straight and long. I turned on the CB radio to listen for any chatter. Static mostly. The occasional voice broke through, a driver checking in, sharing weather reports. Nothing unusual. I passed the mile marker indicating I was halfway to the company lot. The highway lights were fewer now, replaced by old reflective signs that caught the beams of my headlights. I shifted gears smoothly, feeling the engine respond. The truck's cabin was warm from the heater. Outside, the cold was settling in. I kept a thermos of coffee beside me, sipping occasionally to stay alert. The road rolled ahead, uninterrupted, the quiet stretching around me. About an hour later, I saw headlights behind me. approaching fast. A car was coming up quickly, weaving slightly. I kept to the right, making room. The car flashed its high beams once or twice, then slowed to a stop a few hundred feet behind me. The driver didn't move, just sat with the lights on. I felt uneasy but tried to ignore it. After a few minutes, the car pulled off to the side and disappeared into the trees. I kept driving, the feeling lingering. Finally, I reached the company lot. It was fenced, well lit, with a few trucks parked for the night. I pulled in, shut down the engine, and climbed out. The cold hit me immediately, biting through my jacket. I locked the cab and headed to the small office to check in. The lot manager greeted me, taking my paperwork and confirming the delivery. He told me the unloaders would be there by 6 a.m., so I had a few hours to rest. I parked the truck in an empty spot, set the parking brake, and turned off the lights. I opened the sleeper cab, arranging my blankets and pillow. The engine's hum was replaced by silence. I lay back, staring at the ceiling. My mind wandered over the day's drive. The endless miles, the small details, the people I never saw. I thought about the figure on the roadside, the strange car behind me. It didn't make sense, but nothing had happened. No danger, no problems. I closed my eyes and drifted into a deep sleep. When morning came, the sky was a pale gray, the first light filtering through the windows. The unloaders arrived on time, and the process began smoothly. Pallets were taken off carefully, the construction materials stacked where they needed to be. The driver before me had left the spot clean, and I did the same. After the unload, I did a quick inspection of the truck. No damage, no issues. The tires were good, brakes responsive. I filled out the paperwork and called dispatch to confirm the delivery. Then I climbed back into the cab, started the engine, and headed out for the next job. The road stretched ahead, long and steady, just like always. Looking back, that night had been strange, with little moments that didn't quite fit together. But the job was done and I was safe. That's what mattered most out here. No surprises, no risks, just the road and the drive ahead. And for a trucker like me, that was enough. I had been on the road for nearly 10 hours by the time the sun started to dip low on the horizon. The highway stretched out ahead like an endless ribbon, surrounded by flat fields and patches of forest that looked like shadows against the orange sky. I was hauling a load of refrigerated goods from Chicago to Dallas. A routine trip, but one that always demanded focus. The rig I drove was a big, heavy 18-wheeler, a Kenworth T680 with a powerful engine that hummed steadily beneath me. I liked this truck. Comfortable seats, good suspension, and a big windshield that gave me a clear view of the road ahead. It wasn't much, but after years behind the wheel, it felt like my second home. I had started early that morning, leaving the warehouse with a full trailer packed tight with frozen food. The temperature inside the trailer was set to keep everything just below freezing, and I checked the gauge every hour or so to make sure it stayed steady. If that load warmed up for even a few minutes, the whole shipment could be ruined. So, I kept the engine running on the reefer unit and kept an eye on it with that little screen mounted on the dash. Simple but critical. Traffic was light this late in the afternoon. Most cars were heading home after work, but I was far enough away from any big city that it was just me and the road for miles. I kept my speed steady, around 60 miles per hour, conserving fuel but still making good time. The highway was straight and flat, perfect for long stretches of driving without too much effort. The radio played quietly in the background, mostly country music and some talk shows, but I mostly focused on the road and the rhythm of the wheels on the asphalt. About 4 hours in, I stopped at a rest area just off the highway to stretch my legs and grab a coffee from the vending machine. The rest area was small but clean, with a few other trucks parked nearby. I took a quick walk around the trailer, checking the tires for any signs of damage or wear. Tires are the one thing you never want to ignore when driving a big rig. A blowout on the highway at 60 miles an hour could be deadly. Everything looked good. I leaned back against the side of the trailer for a moment, took a deep breath of the cool evening air, and sipped my coffee. The smell of diesel and fresh air mixed in a way that somehow felt familiar, like it belonged to this life on the road. Back in the cab, I adjusted the seat, set the cruise control, and got back on the highway. Night was falling quickly now, and the temperature outside dropped. The highway lights were few and far between, so the headlights of the truck cut through the darkness, illuminating the road in front of me. At night, everything changed. The quiet, the cool air, the stars overhead. It made the long hours feel a little less lonely, but it also demanded more attention. One mistake, one moment of tiredness, and things could go wrong fast. I passed through a small town around midnight, a place with only a few flickering streetlights and closed shops. The highway curved slightly here, and I slowed down to navigate the turn carefully. My eyes flicked to the side mirrors constantly, watching for anything unusual. The road was empty except for a few other trucks and the occasional car. I kept my hands steady on the wheel and my mind alert. Around 2 a.m., I pulled over at a truck stop to refuel. The diesel pumps were busy with other truckers taking their breaks. I checked the oil, topped off the coolant, and made sure everything was in order before getting back on the road. I also grabbed a sandwich from the small convenience store inside. No time for a real meal when you're racing the clock and the miles keep piling up. The smell of grease and coffee hit me as I walked inside, a smell I knew well from years of overnight stops. Back on the highway, the night grew colder. The road stretched out like a black ribbon, and the headlights revealed occasional patches of fog in the distance. I turned on the windshield wipers just enough to keep the glass clear and slowed a little to stay safe. The reefer unit hummed steadily, a steady reminder that the load behind me was still fresh. Around 4 a.m., I started feeling the weariness creep in. Long drives like this take a toll on the body. My neck was stiff, and my eyes ached from staring at the road for so long. I reached for a bottle of water and took a few sips, trying to stay awake. I knew the hours between 3 and 5 in the morning were the most dangerous for drivers, the time when the body's natural clock wants to shut down. About 30 minutes later, I saw the first signs of dawn in the east, a faint glow breaking the darkness. The sky slowly turned from black to deep blue, and then to pale pink as the sun rose. It was a small comfort after hours of driving through the night, a reminder that the day was starting again. I still had about 2 hours to go before reaching the Dallas warehouse. The highway was quieter now, but the sun rising brought a new kind of fatigue. I kept my hands firmly on the wheel, my eyes scanning the road, mirrors, and dashboard. The load was still safe and cold, and the truck was running smoothly. I took a deep breath, feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion. When I finally pulled into the warehouse parking lot just before 7 a.m., I parked the truck and shut off the engine. The air inside the cab felt stuffy after all those hours, so I cracked the windows open a little. I climbed down, stretched my legs, and took a long look at the trailer. The temperature gauge still showed the right number, the cargo safe and sound. I checked my watch and saw I had been driving for nearly 18 hours total with breaks. It wasn't my longest trip, but it was tiring nonetheless. I grabbed my paperwork, making sure all the delivery details were correct. A quick inspection of the trailer and cargo confirmed everything was in order. I felt a quiet sense of satisfaction knowing I had done the job well. No accidents, no surprises, no problems. I walked away from the truck, the early morning sun warming my back, and headed inside to hand over the papers and finish the delivery. This was just another day on the road, another haul done right. The life of a trucker is tough, long hours behind the wheel, but when you finish a trip like this, you feel it. Hard work done, responsibilities met, and a safe arrival. That's what mattered most. And just like that, the road behind me was ready for the next trip. I was driving my rig on a long haul from Oklahoma City to Denver, a route I had done many times before. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky with soft pinks and oranges, and the highway stretched ahead, empty and inviting. The morning was cool, the air crisp in a way that always woke me up better than coffee. The truck's engine hummed steadily as I shifted gears, the road smooth beneath the big wheels. I liked these early hours. Less traffic, fewer distractions, and a chance to clear my head before the day's grind fully set in. I had a full load of electronics, mostly televisions and computer parts, stacked carefully and secured tight in the trailer. This load was important, and I'd been warned to be extra careful on the mountain passes ahead, especially the stretch through the Rockies. The weather had been clear so far, but that could change fast in those parts. The radio was playing softly, but I mostly kept it low so I could focus on the road. I watched the miles tick by on the odometer, the familiar sights of small towns and open fields giving way to rocky hills and clusters of pine trees. The highway narrowed and climbed as I approached the mountain section, the sun now fully up and shining through the windshield. The road was winding now with sharp turns and steep grades. I downshifted carefully, using the engine to slow the truck instead of the brakes too much. I'd seen too many trucks lose control on these slopes because drivers relied too heavily on brakes and overheated them. I kept a steady pace, eyes scanning for signs and potential hazards. About halfway up the pass, I noticed a patch of wet pavement around a sharp curve. The shadows of the tall trees made it hard to see, but I slowed more than usual, remembering the advice from the safety video the company made us watch last week. No sudden moves, no hard braking. As I rounded the corner, I spotted a small rock slide blocking part of the lane ahead. Some large rocks had fallen onto the shoulder and just barely onto the asphalt, forcing me to swerve a bit to the left to avoid them. The truck responded well, the steering smooth as I maneuvered around the debris. My heart raced for a moment. I had seen accidents happen from less. The mountain air was sharp and clean, but the tension was real when the road turned dangerous. I kept going, alert for more trouble. A few miles further, a sudden change in weather hit. The temperature dropped quickly, and a light drizzle began to fall. I switched on the wipers, but the rain made the road slicker. The sky had turned gray, and visibility dropped. I slowed further, keeping plenty of distance behind the car ahead, a silver sedan that was crawling along the lane. The brakes were sensitive on wet pavement, especially for a rig like mine. I kept my hands firm on the wheel, feeling the vibrations from the engine and the tires gripping the road. The truck's big mirrors showed the black ribbon of asphalt trailing behind me and the towering cliffs rising above. It was a kind of beauty that felt dangerous at the same time. The vastness of nature, the tiny road cutting through it, and the heavy machine I controlled. Then, the unexpected happened. A deer darted out from the trees on the right, its eyes reflecting in the fading light. It was close, too close. I slammed the brakes immediately, the ABS kicking in as the truck shook. The trailer's momentum made the stop feel like a fight against physics itself. The deer scrambled across the road, barely missing the tires by inches, and disappeared into the forest on the other side. My chest was pounding, sweat breaking out on my forehead despite the cold rain. I pulled over to the shoulder a little further ahead, heart still racing. I took a deep breath, resting my hands on the wheel and letting the truck idle. The silence inside the cab felt heavy, but I was alive, and the truck was intact. The road was still slick, but I had avoided disaster. After a few minutes, I checked the trailer, no damage. The load was still secure and the tires looked good. I took a moment to drink some water and stretch my legs. This was part of the job, the unexpected dangers that came with driving a huge rig through all kinds of weather and terrain. It was a test of focus, patience, and quick reactions. The rain eased as I continued up the mountain, and the road began to level out near the summit. The clouds started to break, and patches of blue appeared in the sky. The valley below stretched wide, dotted with farms and small towns, rivers glinting like silver threads in the sunlight. I took this chance to relax a little, letting the engine roll at a steady pace down the other side of the pass. The brakes needed careful use on the descent, so I kept the rig in a low gear, controlling the speed without burning out the pads. The air smelled different here, fresher somehow, mixed with pine and damp earth. The rest of the trip was uneventful but long. I passed through a few small towns, stopping briefly at a truck stop to fill up fuel and grab a quick bite. The place was busy with other drivers, all tired and focused, sharing the unspoken bond of the road. I checked my paperwork, updated the logbook, and made a quick call to dispatch to report my location. Finally, as the sun began to set, I reached the outskirts of Denver. The city's skyline shimmered against the evening sky, a welcome sight after hours on the highway. I navigated through the traffic carefully, keeping an eye on the truck's clearance and the tight turns in the industrial areas where the warehouses were located. At last, I pulled into the delivery dock, the large bay doors opening to receive the electronics I'd hauled. The dock workers were ready, moving quickly to unload the trailer. I watched as the carefully stacked boxes were lifted off, making sure nothing was damaged. The paperwork was signed, and I confirmed the delivery before shutting down the engine. After a long day, I climbed down from the cab, muscles stiff but a quiet satisfaction in my chest. The road was tough, but I had done my job well. I took one last look at the truck, already planning my next route in my mind. That night, I checked into a small motel nearby, the kind I preferred, clean, simple, and quiet. I showered, changed into fresh clothes, and lay down to rest. The memory of the mountain pass stayed with me. The rocks, the rain, the deer, and the steady hum of the rig beneath me. It was all part of the life I had chosen. The challenges and the rewards mixed into every mile. Tomorrow, I would be back on the road again. But for now, I closed my eyes knowing I was safe, the truck ready for the next journey. The job was hard, but it was honest work, and it gave me a kind of freedom I wouldn't trade for anything. I had been on the road for nearly 12 hours straight when the sun started to dip behind the hills. The highway stretched ahead like a long ribbon disappearing into the horizon, thin and dusty, with nothing much around except patches of dry grass and the occasional faded road sign. My rig, a big 18-wheeler loaded with crates of electronics, hummed steadily beneath me. The cab was warm from the heat of the engine and the afternoon sun that had beaten down through the windshield. I adjusted the air conditioning a bit, leaned back in my seat, and kept my eyes on the road. Trucking was all about rhythm. Long hours driving, keeping steady, watching the miles roll by. I was used to the lonely stretches, the endless highways where the only company was the sound of the engine and the radio playing old country songs. It wasn't always exciting, but it was honest work. Every mile meant money, every stop meant progress, and every delivery meant another paycheck. This trip had been going fine until I hit a stretch of highway that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. The pavement was cracked and uneven, and the yellow lines were faded almost to nothing. The GPS had taken me off the main interstate onto this smaller state road as a shortcut, but it was rough going. I slowed down, careful not to jolt the cargo too much. The crates were strapped tight, but you never know with electronics. One bad bump and it could mean a whole shipment ruined. The sun was setting faster now, turning the sky a deep orange, then a darkening blue. I switched on the headlights and kept driving. The road got narrower, lined with trees on either side that seemed to close in as darkness fell. The only light was from my truck and the occasional flash of distant lightning far off in the clouds. There wasn't another car for miles. At one point, the engine started to sputter. I glanced down at the dashboard. Fuel was fine, oil pressure steady, nothing out of the ordinary. Still, the sputtering didn't go away. I eased off the gas and pulled over on the gravel shoulder. The night was quiet except for the soft hum of insects and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. I climbed down from the cab and popped the hood. The engine was warm but not overheated. I checked the belts, the battery connections, everything I could see. Nothing looked wrong. After a few minutes, I tried to start the engine again. Caught, but the sputtering was worse. I cursed under my breath. I was miles from the nearest town, no cell signal, and the radio only picked up static. My mind ran through the options. The nearest rest stop was still 15 miles back, but turning around would waste hours. Moving forward with a sputtering engine was risky. I decided to give it a shot. Maybe it was just a bad fuel line or a clogged injector, something temporary. I got back into the cab and took a deep breath. The night was fully settled now, cold creeping in through the windows. I pulled out onto the road slowly, trying to keep the engine running smoothly. The sputtering made the truck jerk, but I kept the speed low. Mile after mile, the dark trees on each side blurred past, shadows in the beams of my headlights. My eyes flicked to the fuel gauge again, then the engine temp. Everything seemed normal except the sputtering. After about 10 miles, I started noticing something odd on the side of the road. It looked like tire tracks, but they weren't fresh. More like old tracks pressed into the dirt and gravel. They zigzagged away from the road into the woods. I didn't think much of it at first, just the usual signs of hunters or locals. But the deeper I went, the more tracks I saw, some crossing the road, some heading into the darkness between the trees. At one point, the engine sputtered and died completely. The cab went silent except for the quiet buzz of the dashboard lights. I tried the key again and again. Nothing. No turnover, no sound. Dead. My heart sank. I was stranded on this forgotten road in the middle of nowhere. I sat back, cold sweat breaking out despite the chill in the air. The radio was still static. No phone signal. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove box and stepped out into the dark. The gravel crunched under my boots, the cold night air biting at my skin. I looked around for any signs of help. Nothing but trees, dark and silent. The sky above was clear, stars scattered faintly beyond the tree line. My plan was to walk back to the last intersection where the highway met a bigger road, hoping to find a gas station or a truck stop. The walk was slow, careful. No telling what kind of animals or trouble might be out here at night. I kept the flashlight steady, casting a narrow beam across the trees and bushes. After about a mile, I saw the faint glow of distant lights. Relief surged through me. I kept moving, hearing the occasional crack of twigs underfoot and the wind rustling dry leaves. The tracks I had noticed earlier seemed to disappear as I got closer to the lights. Finally, I reached the intersection. There was a small gas station still open with a couple of trucks parked outside. I checked my phone, signal was back. I called the company, explained the situation, and arranged for a tow truck to come and get my rig in the morning. The driver at the station offered me a hot coffee and some warm food. Sitting there under the harsh fluorescent lights, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and gratitude. The night out there on that forgotten road had tested me. My patience, my judgment, and my grit. But I made it through. It wasn't the glamorous side of trucking, but it was real, and it was mine. The next day, the tow truck arrived and hauled my rig back to the main highway. The mechanic said the fuel pump had started to fail, causing the sputtering and eventual shutdown. It wasn't a quick fix, but it was an honest one. I spent the night in a motel nearby, rested, and by the next evening, I was back behind the wheel, rolling down the open road with a fresh load, ready to keep moving forward. Trucking isn't always about speed or shiny highways. Sometimes it's about dealing with the breakdowns, the long, lonely hours, and knowing when to push and when to wait. That night taught me a lot about patience and persistence. In the end, the road always leads somewhere, and you just have to keep driving until you get there. I remember one trip that stuck with me for a long time. It wasn't the longest haul or the most dangerous route, but something about it made it unforgettable. I was driving a big rig through the middle of the country, crossing from the East Coast to the West. The load was ordinary enough, industrial equipment bound for a construction site in Denver. Nothing flashy, nothing special, just another job. I started early that morning, right before dawn. The air was cold and still, the sky just starting to lighten in soft blues and grays. The highway stretched ahead, empty for miles in either direction. The cab was quiet except for the hum of the engine and the steady rhythm of the tires on the asphalt. I had my routine down. Check the mirrors, adjust the seat, set the radio to something soft, and just drive. For the first several hours, everything was smooth. The road was clear, the weather held steady, and the truck felt good. Sometimes, when the miles just stack up, you get into a rhythm that makes the whole trip feel easier. Your mind drifts, focusing on nothing but the road ahead, the next rest stop, the next town. You watch the sky change, the fields roll past, and the occasional sign telling you how far you've come or how far you have left. By midday, I was rolling through Kansas. It was one of those flat stretches where you can see forever. The sun was bright and the heat was creeping into the cab despite the air conditioning. I had been driving for hours without much traffic around. I pulled over for a quick break at a rest area, a little patch of grass with picnic tables and a bathroom. The rest area was mostly empty, just a few other trucks parked far apart. I took off my jacket and walked around, stretching my legs. It was the kind of place where you can breathe in deep and feel the quiet hum of the highway. You see other drivers, nodding to each other like you share some unspoken understanding about the road, the loneliness, the long hours. I grabbed a cold soda from my cooler and sat on the bench, watching the clouds move slowly. After that break, I got back on the road. The afternoon sun was warm on the windshield, and I kept the windows cracked open a bit to let some fresh air in. I passed small towns and big silos, trucks coming and going, the landscape shifting as I headed west. I was thinking about the delivery schedule, how much time I had left before I needed to stop for the night. The road was long, and after a while, the miles started to feel heavier. My eyes ached from staring at the road, and my back was stiff from sitting in the same spot. I kept my hands steady on the wheel and my mind alert, knowing that fatigue is one of the biggest dangers on the highway. I made a point to keep my pace steady and not push too hard, knowing that the load and my safety were more important than making up a few minutes. Later in the afternoon, the weather shifted. Clouds rolled in faster than I expected, and the sky turned a darker shade of gray. The wind picked up, rattling the cab and pushing against the truck as I drove. I could see rain starting to fall in the distance, a sheet of gray moving toward me. I knew I had to be careful. The highway can get slick, and the wind can push a big rig around if you're not ready. As the rain hit, I turned on the windshield wipers and slowed down. The road shimmered with water, and visibility dropped. The truck felt heavier, the brakes needing more pressure. I watched the lights of other vehicles ahead and behind, all moving cautiously. There was no room for mistakes. I kept both hands on the wheel, my eyes scanning the road for debris, for brake lights, for anything unusual. The rain lasted for nearly an hour, soaking the highway and turning the edges into slick patches of mud and puddles. I stayed focused, knowing that even small mistakes can cause big problems when you're hauling heavy equipment. I checked the mirrors often, watching the trailer and the traffic behind me. When the rain finally eased off, I felt a little relief but stayed careful. The road was still wet, and the wind was still strong. By evening, the sky cleared again, and the sun set in a streak of pinks and purples over the horizon. I pulled off the highway at the next truck stop, tired but feeling good about the drive so far. I parked the rig, locked it up, and headed inside to grab a hot meal and a shower. Truck stops are like little islands of civilization for us drivers. Places where you can rest, eat, and meet others on the road. I ate my dinner slowly, watching other drivers come and go. Everyone had their own story, their own route, their own load to deliver. After eating, I took a shower and went back to the truck to get some sleep. The bed in the sleeper cab is small but comfortable enough if you know how to arrange the blankets and pillows right. I set my alarm and lay back, the hum of other trucks nearby lulling me to sleep. The next morning, I woke early and got back on the road. The last leg of the trip took me through mountains and hills as I got closer to Denver. The road was twistier here, the speed slower. I watched the changing landscape, the trees and rocks replacing the flat plains. The air smelled fresher and cooler. When I finally pulled into the construction site to unload, I felt a deep sense of accomplishment. The whole trip had been long and tiring, but I had made it safely and on time. The workers were ready for the equipment, and I helped direct the unloading with the forklift operator. The truck, the load, and I had done our job well. After everything was off the trailer, I checked the paperwork, signed off, and started planning the trip back. I took a moment to look at the sunset behind the mountains, feeling a quiet satisfaction. Driving a truck is hard work, full of long hours, careful planning, and unexpected challenges. But it's also a kind of freedom, being on the road, seeing parts of the country few people get to see, knowing that you're the one keeping things moving. That trip was just one of many, but it stayed with me because it was real. No strange stories or wild encounters, just a long drive with its own quiet moments of struggle and success. The road demands respect and attention, and when you meet that challenge, you earn a kind of pride that's hard to explain. Every time I climb back into the cab now, I remember that trip, the empty highway at dawn, the heat of the afternoon sun, the storm that tested my focus, and the peaceful feeling of delivering the load safely is what being a trucker is all about. The road stretched out in front of me like a ribbon of black glass under a heavy sky, dull and gray. I sat behind the wheel of my rig, the cab warm from the heater, the hum of the engine a low comfort in the otherwise quiet morning. It was one of those long, endless drives where the world outside feels like it's barely moving, and you're just a lone figure rolling through the miles, carrying a load that pays the bills but never quite fills the emptiness. I had been on the road for nearly 8 hours already, the highway blurring by in the side mirrors. The truck's dashboard was cluttered with little things. A cracked coffee mug from some rest stop, a well-worn map folded up underneath the radio, receipts from fast food joints, and a faded photo taped to the dash of a girl with a bright smile, her hand waving, probably taken years ago. I glanced at it and felt a pang, a quiet reminder of why I did this job despite the loneliness. The cargo was nothing special, just a regular shipment of packaged goods headed to a warehouse in a city a few states over. Nothing fancy, but it paid decent enough, especially for the hours put in. The road had been clear so far, but I knew that wouldn't last forever. There's always a moment on these trips when something throws a wrench in your routine, a reminder that no matter how much you plan, you can't control everything. Around the mid-afternoon, somewhere in the middle of nowhere, I noticed a little car pulled over on the side of the road. It was a battered sedan, older model, with a flat tire and a trunk half open. The driver was nowhere to be seen. At first, I thought about just driving on. That's the rule on this highway. People look out for themselves because help is often hours away, and getting involved can cause delays that cut into your schedule and your paycheck. But there was something about the quiet emptiness of the place, the way the sun was dipping lower and the shadows starting to stretch, that made me slow down. I pulled over a good distance behind the car, cut the engine, and climbed down from the cab. The heat from the engine faded into the cool air, and the smell of diesel and dry dirt filled my nostrils. I grabbed my toolbox from the back and walked over. The tire was completely shredded, and the spare was nowhere in sight. That meant this guy or girl had been stranded for a while. I checked the trunk, which was messy. Old clothes, some tools, and a few empty bottles. No phone in sight either. The car looked like it had been on a long trip, maybe broken down somewhere else and pushed this far. I knew how it felt to be stuck miles from anywhere, no cell signal, no quick way to fix things. I went back to my truck and fired up the engine, then pulled the rig closer to the car. I didn't want to be stuck there all night, so I decided to offer a ride to the nearest town where they could get help. When I opened the passenger door, the driver's seat was empty. I thought maybe they had gone for help, but the open trunk suggested they weren't far. As I waited, I noticed a faint smell, something metallic mixed with oil, coming from under the hood. I popped the hood and saw the radiator leaking badly, a slow drip that could get worse fast. I grabbed my spare coolant and poured what I had in the radiator, hoping it would hold long enough to get the car moving. Minutes passed, and finally, the driver came out of the brush, a young man, tired and dusty, his face flushed from the sun. He climbed into the car and looked grateful but worried. I nodded at him, and he understood the offer without a word. He climbed into the cab, and we started moving slowly toward the next town, about 20 miles down the road. The ride was quiet but not uncomfortable. I kept an eye on the temperature gauge, worried that the radiator wouldn't hold. The road twisted and turned through hills and flatlands, the sky changing from gray to a dull orange as the sun began to set. The weight of the truck made every turn slow, but I stayed focused on the road ahead. About halfway there, the engine started to sputter, and the temperature needle climbed dangerously high. I pulled over to the shoulder and popped the hood again. Steam hissed out, and the coolant was boiling off fast. I grabbed a rag and carefully loosened the radiator cap to release pressure. The young man watched quietly, looking like he wished he could help. We sat there for a few minutes, the air cooling the engine, the fading light casting long shadows. I knew I had two options: call a tow truck and wait, or try to nurse the car the rest of the way. Calling for a tow could take hours, and I was already behind schedule. Plus, this guy needed help soon. I decided to take it slow and see if I could make it. We got back on the road, creeping forward at about 30 miles per hour, stopping every few minutes to check the engine. It was nerve-wracking, but the thought of leaving him stranded was worse. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the sky darkened. My headlights cut through the growing night, the road ahead barely visible. Every bump in the road felt like a risk. Every minute stretched longer than the last. But the small town lights finally appeared in the distance, a soft glow like a promise. We rolled into the town's gas station just as my rig's engine was about to give out. I pulled into a spot, cut the engine, and sat back. The young man climbed out, exhausted but relieved. I helped him find a mechanic nearby who could fix his car properly. Before I left, he thanked me with a simple nod, the kind that says more than words ever could. I climbed back into my rig, the heater warming my hands, the road ahead waiting again. The delay had cost me time, sure, but in that moment, it felt like the right thing to do. Being a trucker means more than just moving freight. It means being ready for whatever the road throws at you, sometimes in the form of another person needing a hand. The rest of the drive was quiet, the dark highway stretching ahead, the miles passing slower now but with a clearer purpose. When I finally rolled into the city that night, I parked the rig and leaned back in my seat, tired but satisfied. The road had tested me that day, but it had also reminded me why I keep doing this job, because it's about more than just trucks and loads. It's about the people, the unexpected moments, and the simple act of being there when it counts. I made a note to check on that young man the next day, to see if he got his car fixed and was back on his way. Because out here, that's what matters. The road might be long and lonely, but it's the connections you make along the way that give it meaning. I woke up early before dawn, the sky still dark and the air cold outside my sleeper cab. The hum of the engine and the faint glow of the dashboard lights were the first things I noticed. I had spent the night parked at a rest stop somewhere in Nebraska. I checked my paperwork and confirmed the next destination was a warehouse in Chicago. It was a long haul, about 6 hours, and I knew the highway would start filling up as the sun came up. Starting the engine was routine, but it never lost its familiarity. The diesel engine roared to life, vibrations running through the steering wheel and seat. I shifted gears smoothly, pulling out from the rest stop onto the highway, careful to merge with the early morning traffic. The road stretched ahead, straight and wide, the highway lined with fields turning gold as the first rays of sunlight hit them. The truck felt heavy today. The load was steel coils, tightly secured with chains and wooden blocks. They weighed a lot, and I could feel the truck's weight in every movement, especially when I took turns or braked. Steel wasn't an easy cargo. If it shifted, it could ruin everything. I made sure to double-check the chains before starting the drive. Safety came first. As I settled into the rhythm, the miles passing under my tires, I looked out at the landscape. The open plains gave way slowly to small towns, gas stations, and diners with their neon signs flickering as they opened for breakfast. I saw other trucks too, the same long rigs rolling along, their drivers living similar lives to mine, moving goods from one place to another. The highway was busy by mid-morning. Cars zipped past, some too close for comfort. I kept a safe distance, knowing that braking with a heavy load required extra time. I watched for the brake lights ahead, signaling any slowdowns or traffic jams. The highway was an unforgiving place if you lost attention. At one point, a sudden gust of wind hit the trailer hard as I crossed a wide open stretch between two farming towns. The trailer swayed slightly, and my hands tightened on the wheel. It was a reminder of how exposed these big rigs were, especially when hauling tall or heavy loads. I adjusted my speed to keep control, careful not to push the truck beyond its limits. Around noon, I stopped at a way station just outside Joliet, Illinois. The officers were polite but thorough. They checked my load, inspected the tires, and made sure everything was secure. I appreciated their work. Keeping the road safe was important for everyone. After the inspection, I grabbed a quick bite from the station's small cafe, a sandwich and some coffee, fueling up for the last stretch into Chicago. Driving into the city was a different challenge. The wide open highways of Nebraska gave way to crowded freeways filled with cars, buses, and trucks all trying to get somewhere. The buildings rose taller and the streets got narrower. Traffic lights, stop signs, and construction zones slowed the pace. I had to stay alert, constantly scanning mirrors for cars cutting in and out of lanes. The warehouse was located on the south side, an industrial area filled with loading docks, trucks coming and going, and workers moving pallets with forklifts. I pulled into the designated spot, feeling the familiar mix of relief and fatigue after hours on the road. I checked in with the dock supervisor, who waved me toward a dock where the unloaders were ready. The process was slow but steady. The workers unhooked the chains securing the steel coils, lifting them carefully with machines designed for heavy cargo. I watched, knowing my job was done for now but aware that every minute waiting was time lost before the next run. Trucking was a constant battle against the clock, balancing safety with speed. After the unload was complete, I did my post-trip inspection, checking tires, brakes, and lights. Everything was in order, but my body ached from sitting and holding the wheel for hours. I climbed back into the cab, shutting the door against the noise of the warehouse. The sun was low in the sky now, the day winding down. Before heading out, I checked my schedule and the next load details. I had to pick up a shipment of refrigerated goods from a nearby terminal, a job for the next day. Planning was part of the routine, knowing where I would be, how long the drive would take, and how much rest I could get. Driving out of the city, the traffic was lighter in the evening. The setting sun cast long shadows across the highway, painting the sky with reds and oranges. The familiar feeling of the open road returned as I left the city behind, heading toward a truck stop a few miles away where I could park for the night. Parking a big rig is not easy in crowded stops, but I found a spot at the back of the lot, away from most other trucks. I set the parking brakes and shut down the engine, feeling the stillness inside the cab. The quiet was a welcome change from the constant noise of the highway. I climbed out, stretched my legs, and looked up at the darkening sky. Stars were beginning to appear, tiny pinpricks of light scattered across the vast black canvas. It was a moment of calm after a long day. I locked the cab and headed inside the truck stop for a shower and dinner, knowing the routine would start again early the next morning. This life on the road was tough, but it gave me a sense of purpose. Moving goods across the country, meeting deadlines, and overcoming the challenges of weather, traffic, and fatigue. This was what kept me going. The road could be lonely, but it was also where I found a strange kind of freedom. At the end of the day, I was just a man behind the wheel of a big rig, carrying the weight of the country on my shoulders. The truck wasn't just a machine, it was a lifeline. And as I settled in for the night, I knew I'd do it all again tomorrow, ready for whatever miles and challenges lay ahead. I remember one trip that stuck with me for a long time. It wasn't the longest haul or the most dangerous route, but something about it made it unforgettable. I was driving a big rig through the middle of the country, crossing from the East Coast to the West. The load was ordinary enough, industrial equipment bound for a construction site in Denver. Nothing flashy, nothing special. Just another job. I started early that morning, right before dawn. The air was cold and still, the sky just starting to lighten in soft blues and grays. The highway stretched ahead, empty for miles in either direction. The cab was quiet except for the hum of the engine and the steady rhythm of the tires on the asphalt. I had my routine down. Check the mirrors, adjust the seat, set the radio to something soft, and just drive. For the first several hours, everything was smooth. The road was clear, the weather held steady, and the truck felt good. Sometimes, when the miles just stack up, you get into a rhythm that makes the whole trip feel easier. Your mind drifts, focusing on nothing but the road ahead, the next rest stop, the next town. You watch the sky change, the fields roll past, and the occasional sign telling you how far you've come or how far you have left. By midday, I was rolling through Kansas. It was one of those flat stretches where you can see forever. The sun was bright and the heat was creeping into the cab despite the air conditioning. I had been driving for hours without much traffic around. I pulled over for a quick break at a rest area, a little patch of grass with picnic tables and a bathroom. The rest area was mostly empty, just a few other trucks parked far apart. I took off my jacket and walked around, stretching my legs. It was the kind of place where you can breathe in deep and feel the quiet hum of the highway. You see other drivers, nodding to each other like you share some unspoken understanding about the road, the loneliness, the long hours. I grabbed a cold soda from my cooler and sat on the bench, watching the clouds move slowly. After that break, I got back on the road. The afternoon sun was warm on the windshield, and I kept the windows cracked open a bit to let some fresh air in. I passed small towns and big silos, trucks coming and going, the landscape shifting as I headed west. I was thinking about the delivery schedule, how much time I had left before I needed to stop for the night. The road was long, and after a while, the miles started to feel heavier. My eyes ached from staring at the road, and my back was stiff from sitting in the same spot. I kept my hands steady on the wheel and my mind alert, knowing that fatigue is one of the biggest dangers on the highway. I made a point to keep my pace steady and not push too hard, knowing that the load and my safety were more important than making up a few minutes. Later in the afternoon, the weather shifted. Clouds rolled in faster than I expected, and the sky turned a darker shade of gray. The wind picked up, rattling the cab and pushing against the truck as I drove. I could see rain starting to fall in the distance, a sheet of gray moving toward me. I knew I had to be careful. The highway can get slick, and the wind can push a big rig around if you're not ready. As the rain hit, I turned on the windshield wipers and slowed down. The road shimmered with water, and visibility dropped. The truck felt heavier, the brakes needing more pressure. I watched the lights of other vehicles ahead and behind, all moving cautiously. There was no room for mistakes. I kept both hands on the wheel, my eyes scanning the road for debris, for brake lights, for anything unusual. The rain lasted for nearly an hour, soaking the highway and turning the edges into slick patches of mud and puddles. I stayed focused, knowing that even small mistakes can cause big problems when you're hauling heavy equipment. I checked the mirrors often, watching the trailer and the traffic behind me. When the rain finally eased off, I felt a little relief but stayed careful. The road was still wet, and the wind was still strong. By evening, the sky cleared again, and the sun set in a streak of pinks and purples over the horizon. I pulled off the highway at the next truck stop, tired but feeling good about the drive so far. I parked the rig, locked it up, and headed inside to grab a hot meal and a shower. Truck stops are like little islands of civilization for us drivers. Places where you can rest, eat, and meet others on the road. I ate my dinner slowly, watching other drivers come and go. Everyone had their own story, their own route, their own load to deliver. After eating, I took a shower and went back to the truck to get some sleep. The bed in the sleeper cab is small but comfortable enough if you know how to arrange the blankets and pillows right. I set my alarm and lay back, the hum of other trucks nearby lulling me to sleep. The next morning, I woke early and got back on the road. The last leg of the trip took me through mountains and hills as I got closer to Denver. The road was twistier here, the speed slower. I watched the changing landscape, the trees and rocks replacing the flat plains. The air smelled fresher and cooler. When I finally pulled into the construction site to unload, I felt a deep sense of accomplishment. The whole trip had been long and tiring, but I had made it safely and on time. The workers were ready for the equipment, and I helped direct the unloading with the forklift operator. The truck, the load, and I had done our job well. After everything was off the trailer, I checked the paperwork, signed off, and started planning the trip back. I took a moment to look at the sunset behind the mountains, feeling a quiet satisfaction. Driving a truck is hard work, full of long hours, careful planning, and unexpected challenges. But it's also a kind of freedom, being on the road, seeing parts of the country few people get to see, knowing that you're the one keeping things moving. That trip was just one of many, but it stayed with me because it was real. No strange stories or wild encounters, just a long drive with its own quiet moments of struggle and success. The road demands respect and attention, and when you meet that challenge, you earn a kind of pride that's hard to explain. Every time I climb back into the cab now, I remember that trip, the empty highway at dawn, the heat of the afternoon sun, the storm that tested my focus, and the peaceful feeling of delivering the load safely. Is what being a trucker is all about. I remember one trip that stuck with me for a long time. It wasn't the longest haul or the most dangerous route, but something about it made it unforgettable. I was driving a big rig through the middle of the country, crossing from the East Coast to the West. The load was ordinary enough, industrial equipment bound for a construction site in Denver. Nothing flashy, nothing special, just another job. I started early that morning, right before dawn. The air was cold and still, the sky just starting to lighten in soft blues and grays. The highway stretched ahead, empty for miles in either direction. The cab was quiet except for the hum of the engine and the steady rhythm of the tires on the asphalt. I had my routine down. Check the mirrors, adjust the seat, set the radio to something soft, and just drive. For the first several hours, everything was smooth. The road was clear, the weather held steady, and the truck felt good. Sometimes, when the miles just stack up, you get into a rhythm that makes the whole trip feel easier. Your mind drifts, focusing on nothing but the road ahead, the next rest stop, the next town. You watch the sky change, the fields roll past, and the occasional sign telling you how far you've come or how far you have left. By midday, I was rolling through Kansas. It was one of those flat stretches where you can see forever. The sun was bright and the heat was creeping into the cab despite the air conditioning. I had been driving for hours without much traffic around. I pulled over for a quick break at a rest area, a little patch of grass with picnic tables and a bathroom. The rest area was mostly empty, just a few other trucks parked far apart. I took off my jacket and walked around, stretching my legs. It was the kind of place where you can breathe in deep and feel the quiet hum of the highway. You see other drivers, nodding to each other like you share some unspoken understanding about the road, the loneliness, the long hours. I grabbed a cold soda from my cooler and sat on the bench, watching the clouds move slowly. After that break, I got back on the road. The afternoon sun was warm on the windshield, and I kept the windows cracked open a bit to let some fresh air in. I passed small towns and big silos, trucks coming and going, the landscape shifting as I headed west. I was thinking about the delivery schedule, how much time I had left before I needed to stop for the night. The road was long, and after a while, the miles started to feel heavier. My eyes ached from staring at the road, and my back was stiff from sitting in the same spot. I kept my hands steady on the wheel and my mind alert, knowing that fatigue is one of the biggest dangers on the highway. I made a point to keep my pace steady and not push too hard, knowing that the load and my safety were more important than making up a few minutes. Later in the afternoon, the weather shifted. Clouds rolled in faster than I expected, and the sky turned a darker shade of gray. The wind picked up, rattling the cab and pushing against the truck as I drove. I could see rain starting to fall in the distance, a sheet of gray moving toward me. I knew I had to be careful. The highway can get slick, and the wind can push a big rig around if you're not ready. As the rain hit, I turned on the windshield wipers and slowed down. The road shimmered with water, and visibility dropped. The truck felt heavier, the brakes needing more pressure. I watched the lights of other vehicles ahead and behind, all moving cautiously. There was no room for mistakes. I kept both hands on the wheel, my eyes scanning the road for debris, for brake lights, for anything unusual. The rain lasted for nearly an hour, soaking the highway and turning the edges into slick patches of mud and puddles. I stayed focused, knowing that even small mistakes can cause big problems when you're hauling heavy equipment. I checked the mirrors often, watching the trailer and the traffic behind me. When the rain finally eased off, I felt a little relief but stayed careful. The road was still wet, and the wind was still strong. By evening, the sky cleared again, and the sun set in a streak of pinks and purples over the horizon. I pulled off the highway at the next truck stop, tired but feeling good about the drive so far. I parked the rig, locked it up, and headed inside to grab a hot meal and a shower. Truck stops are like little islands of civilization for us drivers. Places where you can rest, eat, and meet others on the road. I ate my dinner slowly, watching other drivers come and go. Everyone had their own story, their own route, their own load to deliver. After eating, I took a shower and went back to the truck to get some sleep. The bed in the sleeper cab is small but comfortable enough if you know how to arrange the blankets and pillows right. I set my alarm and lay back, the hum of other trucks nearby lulling me to sleep. The next morning, I woke early and got back on the road. The last leg of the trip took me through mountains and hills as I got closer to Denver. The road was twistier here, the speed slower. I watched the changing landscape, the trees and rocks replacing the flat plains. The air smelled fresher and cooler. When I finally pulled into the construction site to unload, I felt a deep sense of accomplishment. The whole trip had been long and tiring, but I had made it safely and on time. The workers were ready for the equipment, and I helped direct the unloading with the forklift operator. The truck, the load, and I had done our job well. After everything was off the trailer, I checked the paperwork, signed off, and started planning the trip back. I took a moment to look at the sunset behind the mountains, feeling a quiet satisfaction. Driving a truck is hard work, full of long hours, careful planning, and unexpected challenges. But it's also a kind of freedom, being on the road, seeing parts of the country few people get to see, knowing that you're the one keeping things moving. That trip was just one of many, but it stayed with me because it was real. No strange stories or wild encounters, just a long drive with its own quiet moments of struggle and success. The road demands respect and attention, and when you meet that challenge, you earn a kind of pride that's hard to explain. Every time I climb back into the cab now, I remember that trip, the empty highway at dawn, the heat of the afternoon sun, the storm that tested my focus, and the peaceful feeling of delivering the load safely. It's what being a trucker is all about. I was hauling a load of machinery parts from Ohio to Texas. It was early spring and the weather was starting to warm up, but there was still a chill in the air during the nights. My rig was a heavy-duty 18-wheeler, loaded tight with metal crates full of parts for an assembly plant. The weight sat deep on the axles, and I felt it every time I hit the brakes or took a corner. The drive started like any other. I left the yard just as the sun was coming up, heading south on Interstate 71. The roads were clear early in the morning, which made the drive easier, but as the day went on, traffic picked up. I had a plan to keep to the schedule, mandatory breaks, rest at truck stops, and staying within speed limits to avoid tickets. I was used to this rhythm, the long stretches of highway, the hum of the engine, the smell of diesel, and the solitude that came with it. Midway through the second day, as I crossed into Kentucky, I noticed the sky was getting heavy with clouds. A storm was rolling in fast. I'd seen worse, but this one looked serious. I checked the radar on my phone. Rain and wind were coming my way. I made sure to tighten down the tarp over my load, double-checked the straps, and slowed my pace. Driving through a storm with a heavy load is tricky. The wind pushes against the trailer like a sail, and the rain can make the roads slick. You have to be sharp, alert, and patient. By the time I hit the rest area near Lexington, the storm had started in full force. Rain hammered down on the windshield, and the wipers struggled to keep up. I pulled into a parking spot and shut off the engine. Sitting there, I watched as other trucks pulled in, drivers trying to stay safe. I took a moment to stretch, get some water, and eat a quick sandwich I'd packed. The storm showed no sign of letting up, so I decided to wait it out. Safety always comes first. The hours passed slow, the rain drumming on the roof of my truck, lightning flashing in the distance. I used the time to check my load again, making sure nothing had shifted. I also updated my dispatcher about the delay. The storm was hitting the whole region, and traffic was backing up on the interstate. No use risking it. When the rain finally eased up just before sunset, the roads were wet but passable. I hit the highway again, careful on the slick pavement. The sky was clearing, but the air was still thick with moisture. The sun set behind the clouds, casting a soft orange glow on the horizon. It was the kind of calm after the storm that you only get when nature has had its say. Driving through the night, I kept an eye out for any hazards, fallen branches, flooded patches, or slowed traffic. My rig's headlights cut through the darkness, reflecting off wet asphalt. Somewhere in Tennessee, I stopped at a small truck stop for fuel and a quick rest. The place was busy with other drivers, all looking tired but focused. I grabbed a hot coffee, then climbed back into the cab, ready for the final stretch. The last day of the trip was long but steady. I crossed into Arkansas, then into Texas. The weather was much better now, clear skies and dry roads. I could feel the weight of the trip in my body. Sitting for so many hours takes its toll. My back ached, and my eyes felt heavy, but the thought of delivering the load on time pushed me forward. As I neared Dallas, traffic thickened. The interstate was crowded with cars, trucks, and buses. Navigating a big rig through this mess takes patience and skill. I kept my distance from other vehicles, avoided sudden moves, and stayed in the right lanes. The city lights blinked ahead like stars come down to earth. I knew the unloading site was just a few miles from the highway exit. Pulling into the delivery yard, I was greeted by workers ready to unload. I climbed down from the cab, stretched my legs, and checked my paperwork. The yard was busy but organized. The team quickly hooked up to my trailer and started moving the crates off the truck. Watching them work, I felt a sense of relief. This was the end of the line for this load. After the last crate was off, I went back into the office to sign the delivery documents. The dispatcher thanked me for a safe trip and gave me the details for my next haul. I felt the usual mix of exhaustion and satisfaction that comes after a long run. Driving across states, dealing with weather, traffic, and tight schedules. It's all part of the job. Before heading out to find a place to rest, I took a moment to inspect the rig one last time. Everything looked good, the tires, brakes, and lights all in working order. I filled up the fuel tanks, topped off the oil, and checked the tire pressure. Keeping the truck in good shape is as important as the driving itself. One small problem can turn into a big headache on the road. As I settled into a motel nearby for the night, I thought about the trip. It wasn't anything extraordinary, just a regular run with its usual challenges. But there was something about it that stuck with me. The way the storm changed the whole pace of the journey, the quiet moments waiting it out, the steady rhythm of the highway miles ticking away. It reminded me that this job isn't just about moving freight. It's about staying focused, adapting to whatever comes your way, and pushing through till the end. By the time morning came, I was rested and ready for the next route. I knew every trip had its own story, some quiet, some tough, but all real. And that's what makes the life of a trucker. Long hours, hard work, and the road always waiting ahead. I was driving my rig through the heart of the Midwest on a cold October night, hauling a full load of canned goods from Kansas City to Detroit. The highway was long and straight, mostly flat with a few gentle hills that rolled in the distance under the dull orange glow of my truck's headlights. The road was mostly empty except for the occasional car or another big rig like mine, moving like ghosts in the foggy night. The air inside my cab was a mix of diesel, old coffee, and a faint scent of pine from the little air freshener hanging by the window. It wasn't a glamorous life, but it was steady work and it suited me fine. The route I took was well known to me. I had driven it dozens of times, sometimes in blazing heat, sometimes in freezing snow. This night, the air was crisp and sharp, the kind that makes your lungs feel alive and your eyes alert. I had checked my truck before the trip, tires, oil, brakes, all good. I had done the usual paperwork at the warehouse, strapped the load down tight, and hit the road just as the sun was setting behind the horizon. Now, a few hours in, I was settling into the rhythm of the road. Around midnight, I pulled off at a small rest stop somewhere near a stretch of empty farmland. The place was quiet, only a couple of other trucks parked under flickering streetlights. I used the restroom, stretched my legs, and filled my thermos with some hot coffee from the vending machine. The chill in the air had started to seep into my bones, but the coffee helped. I sat back in my seat for a moment, eyes closed, listening to the quiet hum of the diesel engine idling. Back on the road, the landscape was mostly dark fields on either side, with only the faint outlines of barns and silos far in the distance. The moon was hidden behind clouds, so the night was darker than usual. I kept my speed steady, the truck humming beneath me like a living thing. The highway signs passed by in predictable intervals. Exit 45, 40 miles to Springfield. Next rest area in 20 miles. My thoughts drifted to the small diner I'd stop at near the end of the route for breakfast. They made a mean omelet and the coffee was strong. It was a simple comfort, but after a long night on the road, it felt like a little piece of home. About 2 hours out from Detroit, as I approached a small town, the weather started to change. The wind picked up suddenly, rattling the truck's mirrors and making the cab creak. I could smell rain on the air before I saw it. A faint mist at first, then a steady drizzle. The road became slick under the headlights, reflecting the white lines like wet glass. I turned on my windshield wipers, slow at first, then faster as the rain grew heavier. The hum of the tires on the wet asphalt became louder, more urgent. Visibility dropped quickly. The rain was coming down hard, blurring the road ahead and washing the glow from the streetlights. I slowed the truck a bit, keeping a firm grip on the wheel. This part of the route was tricky, lots of curves and some blind spots. I had learned to trust my instincts and drive carefully when the weather turned like this. The radio was quiet, the static filling the cab like background noise. My mind stayed sharp, scanning the road for any hazards. Suddenly, out of nowhere, the truck in front of me braked hard. I had just enough time to slam on my own brakes and swerve slightly to the right shoulder. The sound of screeching tires and the sharp hiss of air brakes filled the night. My heart pounded as I came to a stop just feet behind the other truck. The rain was relentless, pounding the roof and windows like a drum. The driver ahead had pulled over to the side, lights flashing. I stayed put, engine idling, waiting for the storm to pass. I could see the headlights of a few cars moving slowly past us on the highway, their drivers cautious in the downpour. The rain kept coming for nearly half an hour, each minute feeling longer than the last. Then, as suddenly as it began, it started to ease off. The sky began to clear just a little, and the road started drying in patches. I checked my mirrors, then slowly pulled back onto the highway. The night air smelled fresh, cool with the hint of wet earth and grass. The rain had washed away the dust and grime from the truck's windshield, giving me a clearer view. I adjusted my speed to normal and settled back into the driving rhythm. By the time I reached the outskirts of Detroit, the sun was just starting to lighten the eastern sky. The city lights faded behind me, replaced by the soft glow of dawn. I rolled into the warehouse just as the morning shift was starting. The unloading crew was ready, and the work began immediately. I checked the load, made sure everything was accounted for, then signed the paperwork. It was routine, but it felt good to be done after the long night. Before leaving, I grabbed a hot breakfast from the small diner near the warehouse. The eggs were hot, the bacon crispy, and the coffee was exactly how I remembered, strong and black. I sat by the window, watching the city wake up, feeling the tired ache in my legs and the steady hum of satisfaction in my chest. Driving trucks wasn't an easy life, but it was mine. It gave me time alone with my thoughts, a steady paycheck, and the freedom to see parts of the country few people get to. I packed up, checked my paperwork once more, and started planning the next run. The roads were calling again, and soon I'd be back behind the wheel, chasing the endless highway, ready for whatever came next. The night's rain, the long miles, the quiet moments, all of it was part of the job. And for me, it was exactly where I was meant to be. I had been on the road for almost 12 hours when I noticed the sky slowly shifting from a dull gray to a deep orange, the sun setting behind a line of distant hills. I was hauling a load of refrigerated goods from Dallas to a distribution center just outside of St. Louis. The highway stretched long and straight in front of me, a 2-lane stretch of asphalt flanked by cornfields fading into brown as the season turned from late summer to early fall. The truck cab was quiet except for the steady hum of the engine and the soft crackling from the radio, which I kept low to avoid distractions. My rig was a big 18-wheeler, a Freightliner Cascadia with a powerful Detroit engine that I trusted like an old friend. It had been good to me for years, never once breaking down when I needed it most. I checked my mirrors again, making sure the empty lanes behind me stayed clear. The road wasn't busy, but I always kept an eye out. I knew how quickly things could go wrong out here. Tired drivers, bad weather, and unexpected road work. I reached over to grab a bottle of water from the cup holder, taking a long drink before setting it down and focusing back on the road. As I drove through a small town with a blinking stoplight and a few scattered businesses, I noticed a sign for a diner a few miles up ahead. My stomach rumbled. It had been hours since my last meal, and the thought of stopping for a hot plate was tempting. But I reminded myself I still had to make good time to stay on schedule. The distribution center wasn't far, and I didn't want to risk losing a delivery window. I kept my foot steady on the accelerator and pushed forward. The sun dipped lower, and soon the sky darkened to a deep blue. The truck's headlights cut through the growing shadows, illuminating the cracked pavement and the outline of trees that bordered the road. I flipped on the dashboard lights, glancing at the gauges. Everything was running smoothly, oil pressure steady, temperature normal. The brakes felt solid when I tested them lightly. I had done my pre-trip inspection earlier in the day, but I was always double careful when driving at night. Somewhere in the middle of nowhere, the highway narrowed even more. I noticed a few patches of gravel and some potholes that had been patched up but were still rough on the suspension. The tires grumbled over the uneven surface. I slowed down a little, careful not to shake the load in the trailer too much. The cargo was mostly frozen vegetables and dairy products, and though they were packed tightly in the refrigerated trailer, any sudden jostle could cause damage. I reached for the CB radio and clicked the mic, listening to the usual chatter from other drivers. There were some reports about slow traffic ahead near an exit, but nothing urgent. I signed off and let the silence return. The steady rhythm of the wheels on the pavement became a kind of meditation. About an hour later, I saw a sign for a rest area up ahead. My eyes were heavy now, the long day catching up with me. I decided to pull over for a short break. The parking lot was almost empty except for a few cars and one other big rig parked near the far end. I shut down the engine and climbed out of the cab. The cool night air was crisp, and I breathed it in deeply. Stretching my legs helped wake me up a little. I walked over to the picnic tables near the restrooms, pulling out a granola bar and a thermos of coffee I had packed earlier. I sat there for about 15 minutes, letting the quiet settle over me. The stars were bright overhead, and the faint sound of insects filled the night. Back in the cab, I started the engine again and merged back onto the highway. The road ahead was empty, the stretch of highway ahead lit only by my headlights. About 20 minutes later, I saw the flashing lights of a road crew up ahead. The highway was down to one lane, and the traffic slowed to a crawl. I eased the truck forward, watching the workers as they patched the shoulder and cleared debris from the roadside. The delay cost me some time, but I didn't mind. I was more focused on driving safely. My rig was heavy, and sudden braking or sharp turns were out of the question on this stretch of uneven pavement. After about 20 minutes, the road opened up again, and I picked up speed. As I neared the outskirts of St. Louis, the city lights flickered in the distance. The night had deepened, and the air was cooler now. I checked my watch. It was nearly midnight. The distribution center was a sprawling complex with rows of warehouses and loading docks. The GPS led me down a maze of service roads lined with bright floodlights. Pulling into the designated unloading area, I felt a wave of relief. The long haul was almost over. I shut down the engine, and the quiet of the yard felt strange after so many hours of constant noise inside the cab. I climbed down and started the process of detaching the trailer. The dock workers were already waiting, efficient and professional. They inspected the seals and paperwork, then hooked up the dock locks. I helped guide the trailer into position for unloading. While the cargo was being unloaded, I took the time to do a quick inspection of the rig, checking tires, fluids, and the trailer's refrigeration unit. Everything looked good. The truck had held up well on the long journey. With the unloading finished, I filed my delivery paperwork and confirmed the next assignment. I had a couple hours to rest before the next trip, so I headed to the driver's lounge inside the warehouse building. It was a small room with chairs, vending machines, and a few tables. I grabbed a cold soda from the machine and found a quiet corner to sit. As I relaxed, I thought about the day's drive, the long stretches of empty highway, the changing weather, the challenges of navigating construction zones, and the satisfaction of getting the load delivered safely and on time. It wasn't an easy life, and it required patience and attention to detail, but I liked the freedom the road gave me. Eventually, the fatigue caught up with me, and I closed my eyes for a short nap. When I woke up, I felt refreshed enough to face the next journey. I knew the road would always have its surprises. Traffic, weather, mechanical issues, but I also knew I was ready. My rig was strong, and so was I. Before heading back out, I made sure to review the route for the next trip, double-check the cargo details, and fill out the logbook accurately. Being a trucker was more than just driving. It was about responsibility, discipline, and knowing the importance of every delivery. The night outside was still dark, but the sky was beginning to lighten just a little on the eastern horizon. The next journey was waiting, and I was ready to meet it head-on. The road was long, but it was mine. I started my day early, just like always. The sun was barely up when I climbed into the cab of my rig, a big, heavy-duty Kenworth that had been with me through thousands of miles and countless roads. The engine roared to life, filling the quiet morning air with a steady rumble that I had come to find oddly comforting. My route for the day was a long haul, about 800 miles from Oklahoma City to Denver. It wasn't a tough run by any means, but it was the kind of day that would test your patience and attention, especially with winter slowly creeping in. I checked all my gauges, blinkers, and mirrors before pulling out of the lot. The air was cold, sharp, and smelled faintly of diesel and pine trees, which told me I was headed toward the mountains. I always liked the smell of pine. It made the long drives through endless highways feel less empty. The road stretched ahead, a ribbon of black asphalt cutting through the flat plains before rising into the foothills. The first few hours were uneventful. I kept a steady pace, sticking to the speed limit and watching for the usual hazards: other trucks, slow cars, and sometimes wildlife crossing. At a rest stop around noon, I took a break. I pulled off, parked in a wide lot with a few other rigs, and climbed down to stretch my legs. The cold bit at my face as I stepped out, reminding me to keep my jacket zipped up tight. I grabbed a coffee from the little diner nearby, the kind of place where truckers swap stories and the food was heavy but good. Back on the road, I passed through small towns with names like Clinton and Woodward. Each one had its own little charm. Weathered signs, mom-and-pop stores, and gas stations where I could fill up or grab snacks. I didn't mind these stops. They broke up the monotony of the highway and gave me a moment to feel grounded outside the cab. As I got closer to the mountains, the road began to twist and turn, climbing higher with each mile. The weather shifted too. Clouds gathered thick and low, and the temperature dropped. Snowflakes started to fall lightly, dusting the windshield and making the road slick in patches. I slowed down, careful to keep the truck steady on the wet pavement. The Kenworth handled well, but I knew the importance of caution in this kind of weather. Around late afternoon, I hit a stretch of road that was particularly narrow and winding. One lane each way, lined with guardrails and steep drops down to rocky ravines. I kept my eyes sharp, watching for ice on the road and any vehicles coming toward me. A few times, the wind gusted hard, making the rig sway a little. I gripped the wheel tight and adjusted my speed to match the conditions. Then, as I was rounding a bend, I noticed something up ahead. A car stalled on the side of the road, hazard lights flashing weakly. I wasn't close enough to stop, and there was no shoulder to pull over safely. The driver must have seen me coming, but the car looked like it had been there a while, maybe with a flat tire or worse. I made a mental note to report it at the next way station or truck stop. The snow grew heavier. It was settling on the trees and rocks, turning everything white. The headlights reflected off the flakes, and the world outside the cab felt quiet and distant. The steady hum of the engine and the rhythmic beat of the windshield wipers were the only sounds breaking the silence. Night came quicker in the mountains. By the time I reached a rest area a little past a small town called Morrison, the sky was fully dark, and the temperature had dropped below freezing. I pulled in to take another break and checked the truck. The cold air hit my face as I climbed out. I did a full walk around, checking the tires, brakes, and trailer locks. Everything looked good, but the cold was starting to seep into my bones. I made a quick sandwich and drank some hot coffee from a thermos before climbing back inside. I set the heater to a comfortable level, but I kept the windows cracked just enough to keep the air fresh. After a long day on the road, I felt tired but alert. My body ached from sitting, and my eyes burned from the glare of headlights and street lamps, but the quiet comfort of the cab kept me going. The last stretch was the hardest. The snowstorm intensified, and the visibility dropped to almost nothing. I turned on the fog lights, slowed the rig down to a crawl, and gripped the steering wheel with both hands. The tires made a soft crunch on the snowy pavement, and the truck's engine worked harder to keep moving forward. I had driven in bad weather before, but this felt tougher. The storm was relentless, and every mile was a battle against the cold and the dark. As I got closer to Denver, the traffic began to pick up. Cars and trucks moved slowly, their brake lights glowing red in the snowy night. I stayed calm, keeping a safe distance and watching for any sudden stops or slides. A few times, I saw vehicles spin out or slide off the road, but the plows were working hard, clearing the lanes and spreading salt. Finally, after hours of slow driving, I reached the city limits. The storm had eased up, and the roads were clearer. I followed the GPS to the warehouse where I had to drop off the load. The bright lights of the industrial park felt like a welcome sight after the long, cold journey. I parked the rig and climbed down, my legs stiff but steady. I made my way inside the warehouse to check in and hand over the paperwork. The workers were busy but efficient, and before long, the trailer was unloaded. I felt a sense of relief and accomplishment. Another haul done safely, no accidents, no close calls. Back outside, the air was still cold but quieter now. I started the truck and headed toward the hotel where I would rest before the next run. The snow had stopped, and the roads were clear enough for a decent drive. As I pulled away, I thought about the day, the miles behind me, the weather that tested my skill, and the long hours that made this job tough but rewarding. I knew that trucking was not just about driving a big truck. It was about staying focused, being prepared, and respecting the road and the conditions. That night, I parked the rig safely, turned off the engine, and stepped inside my room. I peeled off my jacket and boots, feeling the warmth seep into my tired body. I lay down and closed my eyes, knowing that tomorrow would bring another route, another challenge. But for now, I was done. The load was delivered. The road was behind me, and the hard work had paid off. The life of a trucker was never easy, but it was honest, and I was proud to be part of it. I was driving a big rig on one of my usual long hauls, heading west from Texas to California. The sun was just setting behind the endless stretches of flat land, turning the sky into shades of orange and purple. The highway was mostly empty, just a few cars and trucks scattered here and there. It was one of those clear evenings when the air felt dry and cool, a good time to be on the road. My rig was loaded with a shipment of machinery parts, heavy and secured tight. I had checked everything carefully before leaving. Tires, brakes, lights, all of it. The truck felt solid, and I liked that feeling when you know your rig is ready for the long miles ahead. I had been on the road for almost 10 hours, pushing steady but not fast, making sure to stay safe and alert. My schedule wasn't tight, but I wanted to keep good time so I wouldn't have to rush the next day. The highway cut through some flat farming land for miles, then started climbing slightly as I got closer to some low hills near the border of New Mexico. The sun was gone now, replaced by a deep blue sky full of stars. I kept my headlights on low beam, watching the road carefully. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that can make you feel alone but also calm. The radio was off. I prefer silence or just the hum of the engine when I'm driving at night. It helps me focus. About 2 hours past a small town called Lordsburg, I noticed something strange ahead. There was a patch of road with a lot of broken glass and debris scattered across it. I slowed down to avoid any damage to my tires. It looked like maybe a car had been in an accident there recently, but there were no emergency lights or people around, just the wreckage lying on the shoulder and a few skid marks on the asphalt. I stayed alert, watching for anything unusual. Not long after that, the highway narrowed as it went through a stretch of canyons. The road twisted and turned more sharply here, the cliffs rising high on one side and dropping steeply on the other. I kept my speed slow and steady, careful with every curve. The truck handled well, but I knew better than to push it on roads like this. My rig felt heavy around the bends, and the darkness made it harder to see what was coming. Suddenly, I caught sight of a car pulled over on the right side, just beyond a bend. It was a small sedan, the kind you'd see in any city, but it looked out of place here. The car's hazard lights were flashing, but no one was outside. I glanced over quickly, my eyes scanning for anyone who might need help. The roadside here was rough, gravel and rocks. Not a good place to stop if you're broken down. I kept my distance, slowing a little more just in case, but I didn't want to stop. Something about that car didn't sit right with me. It was late, and I had miles to go before I could rest. The road ahead was still twisting, and I didn't want to get caught stuck here. The truck's engine rumbled as I shifted down a gear to take the next curve. Suddenly, I felt a bump under the wheels. I glanced in my mirrors and saw a big piece of tire tread lying in the middle of the lane. I swerved slightly to avoid it, but my left rear tire hit the edge of the debris. A sharp vibration ran through the truck, and I could hear a strange flapping noise. I pulled off onto a wider spot on the shoulder and stopped. Getting out of the cab, I grabbed my flashlight and walked around to check the tires. Sure enough, my left rear tire was shredded, the rubber torn and hanging loose. It wouldn't hold air, and there was no way I could keep driving like this. I cursed under my breath, knowing I had to fix this or call for help. My phone had patchy signal in the canyon, but I hoped it would work. While changing the tire, the cold night air bit at my fingers. I worked carefully, the flashlight cutting through the darkness. The spare was heavy but in good shape. I tightened the bolts firmly, then packed up the tools and climbed back into the cab. The whole process took nearly an hour, and I was glad no other vehicles passed by during that time. Back on the road, I drove slower, aware of the extra weight and the temporary tire. My mind was busy with thoughts about what I'd seen, the abandoned car, the accident debris. I wondered if someone might have been hurt and if help had come. But I kept my focus on the road, knowing I couldn't do anything now except keep moving. As dawn started to break, the sky lightened from dark blue to soft pink. I reached the top of the canyon and the road straightened out again. The open desert spread before me, endless and quiet. I felt relief wash over me. The long night was almost over. About an hour later, I stopped at a rest area near a small town to get coffee and stretch. Inside the small cafe, the smell of fresh coffee and warm breakfast filled the air. I sat for a while, drinking slowly and letting my muscles relax. Other truckers came and went, all with their own stories and miles behind them. After the break, I hit the road again with renewed energy. The rest of the trip went smoothly, the sun climbing higher as I crossed into California. I delivered the machinery parts on time, the paperwork signed and checked. The customer thanked me quietly, no fuss, just business. Reflecting on that night, I realized how much being a trucker means staying alert, ready for anything. No fairy tales or ghosts, just the reality of the road. The unexpected problems, the long hours, and the satisfaction of getting through it all safely. That night reminded me how much I respect the power of a simple broken tire or an empty car on the side of the road. They can change the whole trip if you're not careful. Driving trucks is about control and caution, but also about knowing when to trust your instincts. I trusted mine that night, slowed down when things didn't feel right, and stayed focused until I was safe. The road can be lonely and tough, but it's honest. You get what you earn by paying attention, working hard, and pushing through the hard parts. That's the life I know, and I'm ready for the next trip, the next mile, whatever it brings. I was on the road again, a long haul stretching from the outskirts of Denver all the way down to New Orleans. The truck, my old but reliable Kenworth, rumbled beneath me like a living beast, steady and strong. It was late fall, the air crisp with a bite that hinted at the coming winter. I had left the yard early that morning before dawn to make sure I had enough time to cover the 600 miles ahead without rushing. The highway was mostly empty, the kind of quiet that only a trucker knows. A soundscape of the engine's steady hum, tires rolling over asphalt, and the occasional crackle from the CB radio. The freight was nothing special, just a load of canned goods bound for a supermarket chain in Louisiana. But it wasn't the cargo that made this run stand out. It was the road itself and the small moments that come with being alone behind the wheel for hours on end. I had just crossed the border into Oklahoma when the sun started to rise. The sky turned from a deep blue to a wash of orange and pink, lighting up the flatlands around me. The horizon was endless, with stretches of farmland and occasional patches of forest. There was something calming about that open space, like the world had room to breathe out here. I glanced at the dashboard clock, 7:15 a.m. The miles ticked by steadily. As I drove, my mind wandered to the rhythm of the job. The strict schedule, the paperwork, the loading docks. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. There's a certain peace in the routine, in knowing the truck and the road so well that you can almost drive by instinct. I made sure to keep my eyes peeled for those little things that can turn a good day into a bad one. Debris on the road, sudden changes in weather, other drivers who don't watch their mirrors. Around mid-morning, I stopped at a truck stop off Interstate 44 for fuel and a quick bite. These stops are like little islands of normal life in the middle of long stretches of highway. The smell of diesel, coffee, and greasy breakfast filled the air. I pulled up to the pump, shut down the engine, and stretched my legs. The cold air stung my face, and I zipped up my jacket tighter. After fueling up, I grabbed a hot sandwich and a cup of coffee from the diner inside. The place was busy with other truckers, each lost in their own world, their own routes. Back on the road, I adjusted the mirrors and set the cruise control. The radio played soft country music, low enough not to distract me. The road ahead curved gently through rolling hills, and the trees on either side were starting to show their autumn colors: red, yellow, and brown. It was a reminder that the year was slipping away fast. I passed through Tulsa just after noon. Traffic picked up around the city, trucks and cars weaving between lanes, all moving toward their destinations. Driving through urban areas always required extra attention. There's no room for mistakes in those moments. I kept a firm grip on the wheel and slowed down when the road narrowed and construction signs popped up. Once clear of the city, I settled back into the open highway. The afternoon sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the pavement. I kept an eye on the fuel gauge and the load behind me. The truck was heavy but balanced, the weight distributed evenly. Proper loading is crucial, and I took pride in knowing my cargo was secure. I had spent the first part of the morning double-checking the straps and locks before hitting the road. The miles rolled on, and the scenery gradually changed. The flat farmland gave way to denser woods and small hills as I neared the Arkansas border. The road narrowed in spots, winding through the trees. I slowed down, mindful of the curves and potential wildlife crossing. Out here, you never know when a deer might dart out from the brush. Better safe than sorry. Late afternoon was creeping in as I approached a rest area near Little Rock. I decided to pull in for a short break to stretch and check my rig. Climbing down from the cab, I felt the stiffness in my back from hours of sitting. I circled the truck, checking the tires, the brakes, the lights. Everything looked good. The diesel engine sat quiet now, the only sound a distant hum of other trucks and cars. I took a quick walk around the rest area. The sun was dipping lower, painting the sky with gold and purple hues. The air was cooling rapidly. I thought about my destination. New Orleans was still a few hundred miles away, but I was making good time. I needed to keep pushing if I wanted to get there before dark. Back inside the cab, I fired up the engine and merged onto the highway. The setting sun made visibility tricky in some stretches, with glare bouncing off the pavement. I slowed down where needed and switched on the headlights. The road was less crowded now, mostly trucks and the occasional car headed home or on their own long trips. As night fell, I switched the dashboard lights to dim and leaned back slightly. The hum of the engine was almost hypnotic. The world outside was dark, broken only by the glowing lines marking the highway and the distant red taillights of slower vehicles. Night driving has its own challenges, but also a calm that daytime can't match. The loneliness of the road at night can be both comforting and heavy, depending on the mood. Around 10 p.m., I finally saw the outskirts of New Orleans. The city lights twinkled in the distance, a welcome sight after hours on the road. I took the exit ramp slowly, careful to navigate the tight turns and busy streets with the long trailer behind me. My GPS guided me to the warehouse where I was scheduled to unload. Pulling into the yard, I shut down the engine and took a deep breath. The trip was over. The truck would be unloaded overnight, and I'd be able to rest before the return trip. I sat there for a moment, letting the silence sink in, feeling the satisfaction of a job well done. The road had tested me again, but I made it through without trouble. I locked the cab and stepped out into the cool night air. The city smelled different: wet pavement, exhaust, and the faint buzz of nightlife. I grabbed my bags, ready to find a nearby motel for a few hours of sleep. Tomorrow would bring another load, another run, and the endless highway calling me forward again. But for now, I was done. The miles behind me, the road ahead waiting. And me, tired but steady, a trucker in the heart of America's vast and winding routes. The end of this journey was clear: rest, recharge, and be ready to do it all over again. That's the life, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I had been on the road for nearly 16 hours straight when I saw the flicker of headlights coming up behind me. It was late, the kind of late where the dark stretches out like a heavy blanket, and the highway ahead feels endless. The rig I was driving, an old Freightliner, had seen better days, but it still had enough power to keep me moving through the quiet night. I was hauling a load of steel coils from Ohio to Texas, a routine run but a long one. My body was tired, every muscle aching from the constant vibration of the cab and the hard seat beneath me. The highway was mostly empty except for a few trucks and the occasional car. The radio was set to a low volume, playing some classic rock that helped keep my mind sharp and focused. I checked the mirrors frequently, watching the road behind me. The last rest stop I passed was miles back, and I was starting to think about where I could pull off soon to take a break, stretch my legs, and maybe grab some food. As I continued driving, I noticed the headlights behind me seemed to be gaining. At first, I thought maybe the driver was just passing, but the car stayed close, following my speed exactly. I kept steady at 65 miles per hour, the speed limit on this stretch, trying not to give the other driver any reason to rush or slow. The closer the car got, the more I noticed how old and beaten it looked. An old sedan, faded paint, dents along the side. Nothing flashy, just a car that had been on the road a long time. I checked my fuel gauge. I was about a quarter tank down, and the next fuel station was still about 20 miles ahead. I thought about stopping there, but the closer the car behind me got, the more I felt on edge. It's hard to explain, but sometimes being alone on the road, especially at night, makes you extra aware of everything. The quiet hum of the engine, the occasional flicker of taillights, the sounds of tires on asphalt. It all feels sharper. After a few more miles, the car behind me flicked its high beams on briefly and then off. I didn't want to assume anything, but that made me nervous. Usually, a quick flash means the driver is trying to get your attention or warn you about something. I looked in my mirrors carefully, but I couldn't see any obvious problem. The highway was clear ahead, no accidents or stopped vehicles in sight. I decided to slow down slightly, just a bit below the speed limit, to see if the car would pass me. Stayed right behind me, not moving around. I switched lanes to the right shoulder when it was safe, thinking maybe it would use the left lane to pass, but it stayed behind me like glue. That's when I started feeling that odd, tightening sensation in my chest, the kind of unease that comes with not knowing what's about to happen. I wasn't scared exactly, just alert. I thought about calling dispatch to let them know I might need help, but the cell signal here was spotty at best. The night sky was clear, no fog or rain, just the stars and the occasional flash of a passing plane overhead. After about 10 minutes, I saw the faint glow of a rest stop up ahead. I planned to take the exit, park the truck, and step out for a moment. I signaled right, slowed down carefully, and pulled off. The car behind me followed, turning off the highway and parking near the edge of the lot a few spaces away. I sat for a moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel, watching. The engine in my rig ticked softly as it cooled down. The other car's headlights stayed off now, but I could still see it in my side mirror, just sitting there. I looked around the rest stop. It was quiet except for the hum of a vending machine inside the building and the occasional sound of footsteps from a lone traveler crossing to the restroom. Nothing out of the ordinary. I opened my door and stepped outside into the cool night air. The smell of diesel and fresh asphalt mixed with the faint scent of pine from the nearby trees. I stretched my legs and took a deep breath. Sometimes these breaks are more for the mind than the body. I watched the other car for a few more minutes. The driver never came out. The windows were tinted, and I couldn't see inside clearly. After a while, I decided to go inside and get some coffee from the vending machine. Maybe a hot drink would help clear my head and keep me awake for the rest of the drive. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed softly. I inserted some coins, waited for the cup to fill, and sipped the bitter coffee slowly. The warmth spread through my hands, and for a moment, I felt a little more grounded. When I came back outside, the other car was gone. I glanced around the parking lot. No sign of it anywhere. I looked at my rig and then back down the road. The highway stretched empty in both directions. Struck me then how alone the road can feel, even when you think you're not. I thought about the strange driver, the way they followed me so closely, the way they vanished without a trace. No calls, no explanation, just a shadow in the night. I decided to stay at the rest stop for a bit longer. I checked my schedule on my phone, noting I still had hours to go before reaching my destination. But I knew now I had to be extra careful. On the road, things can change in an instant. Trucks break down, weather shifts, and sometimes people behave unpredictably. Eventually, I climbed back into my cab, settled into the worn seat, and fired up the engine. The headlights lit up the empty highway once again. As I pulled back onto the road, I took one last look in the mirror. The stretch of road behind me was dark and quiet. The car that had been following was nowhere to be seen. The rest of the trip was uneventful, the miles slipping by under the steady hum of my engine. I kept my eyes sharp, my hands steady on the wheel. When I finally reached the delivery yard in Texas, I parked the rig, checked the load, and took a deep breath. The road had tested me that night in small ways, with an unknown presence and the feeling of isolation that every trucker knows well. But I made it through safe and sound. It reminded me why I always keep my wits about me, why every mile counts, and why respect for the road and those who drive it matters. There was no drama, no wild chase, just a quiet reminder that even when you're alone out there, you're never completely alone. The road holds its own stories, and sometimes those stories are just about being careful, paying attention, and trusting your instincts. That night, I learned to trust mine a little more. I was on the road again, my 18-wheeler loaded with a full trailer of goods heading from Dallas, Texas, to a small distribution center just outside of Minneapolis. The route was familiar, a long stretch of interstate highways, rural towns, and wide-open fields. It was a late autumn trip, the kind where the air gets cold enough to bite but the roads stay clear enough for steady driving. I had been trucking for nearly 10 years by then, and these runs had become part of a rhythm I lived for, the hum of the engine, the crunch of tires on asphalt, the vastness of the land stretching out on both sides. That morning, I left the truck stop early, before the sun had fully risen. The sky was a deep, cold blue with hints of pink on the horizon. I had taken my coffee, checked my rig thoroughly, and made sure the load was secure before pulling out onto the interstate. The truck felt solid beneath me, the tires gripping the road like they always did, and the diesel engine's steady roar was a comfort in the quiet early hours. The first few hours were uneventful, the miles passing one after another as the landscape slowly changed. The flat, dry plains gave way to rolling hills dotted with patches of yellow and red from the changing leaves. I stayed alert, knowing that as the day progressed, traffic would get heavier, and the weather could change fast in this part of the country. Around mid-morning, I noticed the sky growing darker ahead, with thick clouds rolling in fast from the northwest. I could smell the dampness in the air before I even saw it, that sharp scent of rain and earth mixing. I pulled over at a rest stop just as the first drops began to fall, heavy and steady. The windshield wipers worked hard, but the rain came down in sheets, blurring the view and making the highway slick. I sat in the cab, engine running, watching the rain hammer down. The windshield fogged up despite the heater, so I cracked the window a bit, letting the cold air inside. Rain like this meant slower driving and a lot more care. I checked my mirrors, made sure the trailer was still tracking well, and prepared for the long stretch ahead. After about an hour, the rain started to ease up, turning into a light drizzle. The road was wet, shiny under the overcast sky. I pulled back onto the highway, moving cautiously at first, but the tires gripped well, and the truck responded just as it should. The radio was off. Just me and the sound of the diesel engine and the occasional splash of water as my tires cut through puddles. As the day wore on, the rain stopped completely, leaving a cool dampness in the air. The clouds began to thin, and patches of blue peeked through. I passed small towns where I could see farmers working the fields, preparing for winter. The trucks and cars on the road increased as I neared a larger city. I had to slow down, merge carefully, and keep my distance. The traffic was heavy but moving steadily. By mid-afternoon, the sun broke through the clouds, casting long shadows and lighting the world in a soft golden glow. The warmth felt good after the damp cold of the morning. I stopped at a truck stop near the city for a quick break and to refuel. The place was busy, trucks lined up for fuel and drivers grabbing meals or stretching their legs. Back on the road, I followed the interstate through suburbs and industrial areas. The highway was wide and well-maintained, but I kept my speed steady, knowing the load in my trailer meant I had to be careful with braking and turning. The city noise faded behind me as I left the outskirts, and the road opened up into long stretches of highway with forests and small farms on either side. Late afternoon turned into early evening, and the sky shifted from gold to soft pinks and purples. I found a safe spot at a rest area and parked the truck. I climbed into the sleeper cab and made a quick dinner from the supplies I carried, usually something simple like canned soup, bread, and fruit. I took a shower in the rest area and changed into fresh clothes, feeling the tiredness from the day settle into my bones. Before settling into sleep, I double-checked my logbook, making sure my hours were correct and that I would be ready to get back on the road early the next morning. I set my alarm and laid back on the narrow bed, listening to the quiet hum of the highway not far away. Outside, the stars were faint but visible through breaks in the clouds. The night was cold and still, but I felt safe. The rig was locked up tight, and the truck stop was quiet. I drifted off, the steady rhythm of the engine and the faint sounds of trucks coming and going mixing with the calm night air. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The sky was clear, with a pale blue spreading across the horizon. I stretched out the stiffness from sleeping in the cab, then got up and did my usual pre-trip inspection. Tires checked, brakes tested, lights working. Everything was in order. I climbed back into the driver's seat, started the engine, and pulled out onto the road with a full day ahead. The miles passed steadily. The weather was good, the roads dry, and the load stable. I stopped only for fuel and a quick break to stretch my legs. I kept an eye on the traffic and the weather reports on the radio, planning my rest times and speed to stay safe and on schedule. By late afternoon, I was approaching the distribution center just outside Minneapolis. The sky was bright, and the air had a crispness that told me winter was coming soon. I followed the signs to the unloading docks, where workers were waiting to take my cargo. I parked the truck, shut off the engine, and climbed out to stretch again. The unloading process went smoothly, and I watched as pallets were taken off one by one. Once the trailer was empty, I checked in with the dispatch, confirming my next load and route. For now, I was done with this run. I would spend the night in a nearby motel, rest up, and be ready for the next journey. As I sat in the motel room that evening, I thought about the day's drive. The road had been long, the weather challenging at times, but the truck had held steady, and I had made it safely. The routine, the miles, the solitude, they were all part of what I liked about this life. The endless highways stretching out ahead, the quiet moments in the cab, the small towns and wide open spaces. Trucking was more than a job, it was a way of life, a challenge, and a kind of freedom. I felt tired but satisfied, ready to rest and ready to do it all again. The road was waiting, and I knew I'd be back behind the wheel before long, chasing the next load, the next horizon. I remember the day started like any other when I climbed into the cab of my rig just before dawn. The air was still cold, and the sky was painted with the faint colors of early morning. My truck, a big, heavy, diesel beast I'd named Oil Iron, sat waiting for me, its engine off but ready to roar. I pulled the door shut, the sound echoing in the quiet lot, and settled into the worn leather seat. The miles ahead stretched out on the highway, but this day was about more than just driving. My load was a mixed one, nothing special on paper. Some machinery parts and a few crates of packaged goods headed from a warehouse in Indiana to a small factory outside of Memphis. It was a solid run of about 500 miles, nothing too long or too short, and it gave me a good chance to just focus on the road and the hum of the engine. I double-checked my paperwork, my route, and the truck itself. Tires, lights, brakes, all good. That part of the job was routine but necessary. I never skipped it. You get one chance out here, and a failure can cost you your life. The first few hours went by smooth. The sun climbed higher, and the highway stretched straight ahead like a ribbon of asphalt through endless fields. The radio played softly, but mostly I kept it off. Too many distractions. I like to keep my mind sharp, watching for anything out of the ordinary. Around midday, I stopped at a rest area for a quick break. I grabbed a sandwich from the cooler and sat on a bench near the truck. The air smelled faintly of diesel and grass, a strange but familiar mix after all these years. Back on the road, I could feel the weight of the load behind me. The truck responded well, steady and strong. But as I crossed into Kentucky, the weather began to shift. Thick clouds rolled in, turning the sky dark and low. The wind picked up, rattling the cab and making the rig sway a bit on the highway. I could see rain starting to fall ahead, and I slowed down, careful with the heavy cargo behind me. The rain came hard. At first it was just a drizzle, but soon it was pouring, sheets of water hitting the windshield, making it hard to see more than a few feet in front. I switched on the wipers at full speed and slowed to about 50 miles per hour. The highway was slick, and every truck and car around me had their lights on, moving cautiously. The radio crackled with weather reports warning of storms and possible flooding in some areas. I checked my phone briefly and saw that I still had a couple hundred miles to go. The highway started to climb and twist as it entered the hills. The rain turned into a steady downpour. Visibility dropped even more. I gripped the steering wheel tightly and focused on the road, watching the painted lines and the tail lights ahead. Suddenly, up ahead, a flash of brake lights caught my attention. Traffic slowed sharply. I hit the brakes gently and downshifted to control the rig's speed on the wet road. Traffic came to a near stop a few hundred yards ahead. I could just make out flashing lights from emergency vehicles. My heart rate picked up. I eased the truck to a stop and put it in park, watching carefully as the line of cars and trucks piled up behind me. There had been an accident, a bad one by the looks of it. Several vehicles were crumpled on the side of the highway, and emergency crews were moving quickly. I climbed out of the cab, the rain pelting my jacket as I walked toward the front of my rig to get a better look. A large semi had jackknifed, blocking the highway and causing the pileup. The wet road and steep curves had been a dangerous combination. The emergency workers were focused on helping the injured and clearing the wreckage, but it was clear the road would be closed for a while. I stepped back and looked around. My truck sat heavy behind me, the cargo safe, but the day suddenly complicated. I pulled out my phone again and called my dispatcher to let them know the situation. They told me to wait it out and that they'd arrange for a new route or instructions once the road opened. Hours passed slowly. I sat on the edge of my trailer's step, eating the last of my sandwich, watching the rain come down in sheets. Other drivers shared the same space. Some nodded to me, others just stared ahead, tired and frustrated. There was no arguing with the weather or the accident. We were all stuck until the highway reopened. By late afternoon, the rain began to ease. The emergency crews had done their work, clearing the worst of the wreckage. Traffic was starting to move again, inching forward cautiously. I climbed back into my rig, feeling stiff from sitting so long but grateful the day wasn't worse. The highway was wet and slick but passable. I eased OL, iron forward, careful to keep the load steady. As I drove on into the evening, the sky slowly cleared. The clouds parted to reveal a dimming sun, painting the horizon with orange and purple hues. The road stretched on, long and empty in front of me. I could feel the miles adding up again, each one bringing me closer to the delivery point. When I finally rolled into the small factory yard near Memphis, it was nearly dark. I parked the truck in the designated spot and took a moment to stretch, muscles aching from the long day. The unloading crew greeted me with quick nods and busy hands. I handed over my paperwork, the job nearly done. The day had started ordinary but turned challenging. The rain, the accident, the hours stuck waiting, all tests of patience and skill on the road. But that's part of the job. You don't just drive. You stay alert, adapt, and keep going no matter what the road throws at you. The clear ending came as I watched the unloading finish, knowing I'd done my part. Tomorrow, the cycle would start again. I climbed back into OL, iron one last time that night. The engines rumble, a comforting sound in the quiet yard. The road had been tough, but the truck and I had made it through. That's what being a trucker is all about. Not just moving goods from point A to point B, but handling whatever comes between with steady hands and a clear head. And that night, as I pulled the door shut and settled in for some rest, I felt a quiet pride in the simple, hard work that carried me through. I had been on the road for hours, the sun hanging low but still burning through the cracked windshield of my old rig. The truck smelled like a mix of diesel, stale coffee, and the faint trace of leather from the worn-out seat cover I'd thrown over my driver's chair. My rig was a 1997 Freightliner, sturdy but showing its age in every creak and groan it made. The dashboard was cluttered with papers, maps, and a half-empty bottle of water. My fingers rested on the steering wheel, steady and practiced, guiding the truck through miles of flat highway that stretched like a ribbon across the countryside. That day had started in Kansas City. I'd loaded a shipment of industrial parts, heavy steel rods and coils of wire bound tightly on wooden pallets. The weight made the truck respond sluggishly, especially climbing hills or rounding corners, but I was used to that. I checked the gauges often, air pressure, oil temp, fuel level all normal, except the tire pressure warning blinking faintly. I figured it wasn't urgent, just a sensor glitch or a slow leak to keep an eye on. The highway was mostly empty as I headed west. The sky was clear, blue turning golden, the wind whipping against the truck's sides. The radio played soft country music, nothing loud, just background noise to keep me awake. The highway was a familiar rhythm, the hum of the engine, the occasional rumble strips under the tires, the slow passing of signs marking towns, gas stations, rest stops. About 3 hours in, just past a small town called Norton, the tire pressure warning light went solid. I knew then it was time to pull over. I looked for a safe spot on the shoulder, spotted a wide gravel turnout near a field of dry corn stalks. The truck came to a slow stop, the air brakes sighing and releasing as I shifted into park. I climbed down from the cab and took the flashlight from the dashboard, moving toward the right rear tires. One of the dual tires was low, almost flat, the sidewall sagging against the rim. I knelt down and pressed my hand against the rubber. It was definitely losing air fast. I could hear a faint hissing sound. No wonder the warning light wouldn't quit. Pulling out my tire repair kit, I checked the spare mounted under the trailer. It was old, but still usable if I had to swap it out. I also had a small air compressor powered by the truck's battery and a can of tire sealant. The road wasn't busy, but trucks came by now and then, their engines roaring loud enough to remind me I wasn't alone out here. I sprayed the sealant into the tire's valve and connected the compressor. The gauge rose slowly, but the tire never fully inflated. The leak was worse than I thought. It was time to get serious. I grabbed the jack and lug wrench, positioned the jack under the frame, and started the slow work of lifting the trailer enough to get the flat tire off. It wasn't easy. The gravel shifted underfoot, the jack slipped once or twice, and the sun beat down hard, making me sweat through my shirt. I worked carefully, loosening the lug nuts, prying the tire off the rim. The weight of the tire was heavy, awkward to handle, but after some struggle, I managed to get it off and set it aside. I pulled the spare from under the trailer, coated with dust and grime from the road, and wrestled it onto the rim. The lugs went on stiffly, but after tightening them in a star pattern, I lowered the jack slowly and removed it. I double-checked the tightness of the nuts once the tire touched the ground, then packed up the tools. Back in the cab, I fired up the engine again and pulled back onto the highway. The steering felt different now, lighter on that side. I glanced at the gauges, the tire pressure light was off. Good. But the day was getting late, and the long stretch ahead still loomed. I looked at the GPS. I still had about 300 miles to cover before the drop-off in Denver. It was a long haul, but I was determined to make it on time. The evening settled in, the sky deepening to shades of pink and purple. I rolled down the window slightly to catch the cool air, the scent of dry earth and distant pine trees drifting in. The road wound through hills now, a change from the flat plains earlier. About an hour later, the truck started to feel off. The engine was running rough, a faint knocking sound coming from the front. I eased off the accelerator, the RPMs dropping. The temperature gauge was inching higher. I pulled over at the next rest stop, a small, empty area with picnic tables and a restroom. I popped the hood and leaned over the engine. The radiator was hot, and the coolant reservoir looked low. I didn't have much water left, just what was in the bottle from earlier. I poured some into the radiator, careful not to burn myself. I knew the cooling system could be tricky. Overheating could mean serious engine trouble. After a few minutes, the temperature gauge went down a bit. I decided to call dispatch and explain the delay. The connection was spotty out here, but I got through. They told me to keep an eye on it and find a garage as soon as possible in Denver. Back in the cab, I started the truck again. The engine hummed steadier now, and I felt a little better. I started down the highway, driving slower, paying attention to the gauges. Night fully fell, and the road was lit only by my headlights and the occasional blinking of roadside markers. I could feel the tiredness creeping in. My eyes stung, and my back ached from sitting so long. I turned on the cruise control and focused on keeping the rig steady. Somewhere past a small town called Limon, I saw the glow of lights ahead. Denver was close. The highway widened, traffic picking up as I approached the city outskirts. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I reached the warehouse where I was supposed to drop off the cargo. The parking lot was big, with bright lights and a few trucks already parked. I eased the rig into the unloading dock, careful not to hit the edges. The dock workers checked my paperwork, scanned the pallets, and confirmed the delivery. I shut off the engine and let out a long breath. The trip had been rough, tire trouble, engine overheating, long hours on the road, but I'd made it. The cargo was safe, and the clock still showed I was on schedule. I took a moment to stretch my legs, the cool night air fresh against my skin. I looked up at the clear sky, the city lights flickering behind the warehouse. Tomorrow I would head back on the road again. But for now, I felt the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. The truck might be old, the road long, and the challenges many, but this was the life I knew, the life I chose. Real, hard, and steady. And that night, as I locked the cab and walked toward the small motel nearby, I knew I was ready for whatever miles lay ahead. Because in the end, it's not just about the road. It's about the drive, the grit, and the will to keep moving forward no matter what. I had been driving trucks for almost 10 years when something unexpected happened that I still think about every time I get behind the wheel. It started like any other job, a long haul from Texas to the Northeast, hauling a load of construction equipment. I was used to these long stretches of road, the endless highways where all you hear is the hum of the engine and the wind brushing against the cab. I left the yard just after dawn, the sky still pale and cool, and the truck's engine rumbled steady beneath me. The route took me through a mix of busy highways and quiet backroads. I always liked the quiet parts, the stretches where you could almost forget you were hauling a massive rig. There's something about being alone on the road with nothing but your thoughts and the miles ahead that has a strange kind of peace to it. That day, I took a back route through a small town in Oklahoma. It wasn't on my original plan, but there was a detour up ahead, and my GPS had rerouted me through it. The town looked sleepy, with empty streets and a few old shops that had seen better days. The sun was high now, beating down hard through the truck's windshield, and the heat in the cab was thick. I rolled down the window for some fresh air, and the smell of dry grass and hot asphalt came in. The truck's load felt heavier than usual, making the steering a bit tougher as I headed out of town onto a narrow 2-lane highway that stretched into the countryside. The road was straight but had some dips and rises. The shoulders were thin, and tall trees lined both sides, casting long shadows over the pavement. I kept my eyes on the road, watching for any signs or sudden stops. After about an hour of driving, I noticed the sky was changing. Clouds rolled in faster than I expected, thick and gray, and a cold wind started blowing. The temperature inside the cab dropped, and I could feel a chill on my hands despite the truck heater working on low. The road ahead looked darker under the gathering storm clouds, and I pulled over for a moment near a small rest area to check my load and make sure everything was still secure. The rain started as a light drizzle but quickly turned into a downpour. I sat inside the cab, watching the water streak down the windows and listened to the rain hitting the roof. The wipers worked hard to keep the windshield clear, but visibility was poor. I decided to wait it out for a bit. It was safer to stop than risk slipping on wet roads, especially with a heavy load. After about 20 minutes, the rain slowed to a steady fall, and I decided to get back on the road. The highway was slick, and the trees on either side looked wet and dark. I slowed down, careful not to push the truck too hard in the slippery conditions. The cab felt colder now, and the air inside had that damp smell that comes from rain mixing with the engine heat. About 20 miles later, the storm started to let up. The clouds were breaking apart, and patches of blue sky appeared here and there. I felt a little better as the sun peeked through, warming the cab again. That's when I noticed something unusual. The truck's dashboard lights flickered for a moment, and then the engine made a strange noise, a kind of low grinding sound that didn't belong. I pulled over to the side of the road and climbed out to take a look. The rain had stopped completely, but the air was still heavy with moisture. I checked the tires and brakes first. Everything looked normal, no leaks or obvious damage. Then I popped the hood and looked inside. Nothing was smoking or leaking, but the engine noise was still faintly there when I revved the motor a little. I called my dispatcher to explain the problem and ask for advice. He told me to keep going slowly to the nearest truck stop about 10 miles ahead and get it checked there. The engine noise was worrying, but the truck was still running. I decided to take it slow and be extra careful. Driving at a reduced speed in the middle of nowhere wasn't easy, especially with a heavy load. The road twisted through a mix of hills and trees, and there were a few sharp turns. The noise in the engine became more noticeable, like metal scraping against metal. Every mile felt longer as I focused on the road and listened for any sudden changes. When I finally reached the truck stop, I pulled into a service bay. A mechanic came over and started inspecting the truck while I waited inside the small lounge. After about an hour, he came back with news. One of the belts in the engine was badly worn and had started to fray, which was causing the noise. He said if I had kept driving much longer, the belt might have snapped, which could have caused the engine to fail completely. The mechanic replaced the belt right there. It wasn't a quick fix, but it was the kind of repair that could save me from much worse problems on the road. I felt a mix of relief and frustration. Relief because the problem was caught in time, and frustration because it had slowed me down and added extra stress to an already long day. By the time I got back on the highway, the sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the landscape. The road stretched out in front of me, open and quiet again. The truck hummed smoothly, no more strange noises, and I could feel the weight of the day starting to lift. Driving through the night, I kept my speed steady and my focus sharp. The highway was empty, and the stars were bright above. It was one of those moments where you realize how much depends on the little things. Maintenance, careful driving, paying attention to what your truck is telling you. A truck is a machine, but it's also your partner on the road. When I finally reached my destination the next morning, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The load was delivered safely, and I had made it through a day that could have ended badly if I hadn't been careful. It reminded me why I respect the road and the machine I drive. It's not just about getting from point A to point B. It's about being ready for whatever the road throws at you, day or night. That trip taught me a lesson I never forgot. No matter how routine the drive seems, always expect the unexpected. And always take care of your truck, because it takes care of you. I started my day like any other, pulling out of the truck stop before dawn. The sky was still dark, with only a faint orange glow on the horizon. The road stretched out before me, empty and quiet. I was hauling a load of fresh produce from California to a warehouse in the Midwest. A long trip, but a route I'd done many times before. The rig felt solid under me, my old but reliable Peterbilt, with its deep rumble and steady power. I checked my mirrors, shifted into gear, and eased onto the highway. The first few hours went by smoothly. The roads were clear, the traffic light, and the weather mild. The cab was quiet except for the soft hum of the engine and the occasional crackle from the CB radio. I kept my eyes on the road, hands steady on the wheel. I liked driving at this time of day, when the world was just waking up and everything felt still. The miles slipped behind me one after another, the scenery changing slowly as I crossed from California's dry edges into the greener valleys of Arizona. I stopped at a rest area just before noon to stretch my legs and grab a quick bite. The air was warmer now, the sun climbing high in the sky, beating down through the windshield. I locked the doors, climbed down from the cab, and took a deep breath. The highway noise was faint but constant. Trucks rolling past, tires humming on the asphalt, engines idling in the distance. After a few minutes of walking, I returned to the truck, poured some water into a bottle, and checked my load. Everything looked good. The trailer doors were sealed tight. No signs of damage or shifting cargo. Back on the road, the day grew hotter. By mid-afternoon, the temperature inside the cab was rising despite the air conditioning. I cracked a window just a little to let some fresh air in. The landscape around me had changed again. Flatter now, with stretches of dry grass and scattered trees. I passed small towns and billboards advertising local diners and motels, places I'd stopped before. The highway was busier here, with cars and trucks weaving through the lanes, some drivers in a hurry, others just taking their time. Around 3 in the afternoon, I noticed the truck ahead was swerving slightly. The driver wasn't keeping a steady line, drifting from one side of the lane to the other. I kept a safe distance, watching carefully. A few moments later, the vehicle started to slow down, then pulled off onto the shoulder. I slowed as I passed, glancing in my mirrors to make sure the driver was okay. There was no sign of emergency vehicles or anyone else around. I kept going, thinking about how many times I'd seen things like that on the road. People getting tired, distracted, or caught off guard. It was part of the job, watching not just my own rig but the other vehicles around me. You had to stay alert, especially on long hauls like this one. By late afternoon, the sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon. The light softened, casting long shadows over the fields and hills. I turned on the truck's headlights as the sky darkened. The traffic started to thin out again, the highway quieting after the afternoon rush. I checked my schedule. I had to reach a truck stop about 100 miles ahead to rest overnight before the final leg of the journey tomorrow. I still had time, but not much. Driving through the early evening, I noticed a construction zone ahead. The signs warned of lane closures and reduced speed limits. I slowed the truck, moving carefully through the cones and barriers. The workers were visible in their bright vests, waving me through with clear signals. The road surface was rough, and the bumps shook the cab a little, but nothing out of the ordinary. Still, I took my time, no point risking a fine or damage to the truck. Once past the construction, I settled back into the right lane, easing the rig forward. The sky was almost completely dark now, stars beginning to appear. I could see the faint outline of mountains in the distance, their shapes shadowy against the night sky. The highway curved gently through the landscape, and I adjusted my speed for the turns. About an hour later, I pulled into the truck stop. The place was busy, a mix of rigs parked side by side, lights glowing from cabs, and the hum of generators and idling engines. I found an empty spot near the back and guided my truck into it. I shut off the engine and sat quietly for a moment, listening to the sounds around me. The distant murmur of voices, the occasional beep of reversing trucks, the rustle of the wind through the trees lining the lot. Inside the cab, I checked my paperwork, logged my hours, and prepared for the night. The bed in the sleeper was narrow but comfortable enough. I unpacked a few things, a clean shirt, some snacks, my water bottle. I locked the doors and pulled the curtains closed. The air conditioner hummed softly, keeping the cab cool. I lay back and stared at the ceiling, letting my mind drift. The long hours on the road could wear you down, but there was something peaceful about the solitude. No rush, no noise except what you wanted to hear. Just the steady rhythm of your breathing and the quiet of the night. After a while, I fell asleep, knowing I'd be up early again to finish the drive. The trip was far from over, but for now I was safe and rested. The next morning, I woke early to the soft gray light of dawn. I started the truck, checked everything once more, and pulled out of the truck stop onto the highway. The air was crisp, fresh after the night, and the road was mostly empty. I drove steadily, the miles rolling by as the sun rose higher. By midday, I reached the warehouse where I was scheduled to deliver the load. The dock workers were ready, guiding me into place. I shut down the engine and climbed out of the cab, stretching my stiff legs. The trailer doors opened, and the workers began unloading the crates of produce carefully, stacking them inside the warehouse. I watched for a while, feeling a quiet satisfaction. The job was done, the long drive, the careful handling of the cargo, all of it leading to this moment. The road ahead was still long for my next trip, but for now I could take a break. After the unloading was finished, I filled out the delivery paperwork and checked the truck one last time. Everything was in order. I took a deep breath of the fresh air and looked out over the parking lot. The sun was high now, warm and bright. I climbed back into the cab, started the engine, and pulled away, ready for whatever came next on the highway. The road was open, the rig steady beneath me, and I was exactly where I needed to be. I was driving my rig on a long haul from Texas to Ohio, hauling a load of fresh produce. The trip was routine, but that day felt different from the start. The sky was a dull gray, and a steady drizzle was falling, making the roads slick and tricky to handle. I checked my mirrors again and again, making sure the load was steady. The trailer was packed full, heavy with crates of lettuce, tomatoes, and cucumbers, all destined for grocery stores around Cleveland. My plan was to take the I-35 north, then connect to I-70 heading east. The highway was busy with other trucks and cars, but everyone was careful, given the rain. The windshield wipers were working overtime, but still I had to slow down a bit more than usual. The lights from the trucks ahead made long, bright streaks in the rain, blurring my vision at times. I kept my hands steady on the wheel, feeling the truck's vibrations through the seat. It was one of those drives where you just get lost in the hum of the engine and the road stretching ahead. After a few hours, I pulled into a rest stop just off the highway. The parking lot was wet and slick, and the smell of diesel mixed with rain was strong in the air. I took the chance to stretch and grab a quick bite from the truck stop diner. The coffee was strong and hot, exactly what I needed to keep my eyes sharp. The place was filled with other truckers like me, all tired and focused on their own routes. I didn't stay long. I was eager to get back on the road and make good time. Back on the highway, the rain started to ease, but the sky stayed gray. The road curved through stretches of forest and open fields, and I could feel the truck responding differently on each patch. The tires hissed on wet asphalt, and I kept an eye out for any patches of oil or gravel that could cause a slip. The radio was low, just static and road noise filling the cabin. Around midday, I hit a section of road under construction. There were cones and signs directing traffic, and I had to slow down to nearly half speed. My rig's heavy weight made this stretch feel even longer. The tires crunched on the gravel shoulder, and I carefully followed the signs until I was back on smooth asphalt. Construction trucks and workers were busy on the side, and I gave them space, knowing how important their safety was. A lot of people forget the dangers these workers face every day, but out here you see it up close. After the construction zone, I noticed the sky clearing a bit. The clouds were breaking, and some sunlight was sneaking through. It lifted my spirits. The road started climbing as I approached the hills outside Indianapolis. The truck worked harder on the inclines, and I shifted gears carefully to keep the engine steady. The smell of wet earth and fresh grass filled the air as I drove through this greener stretch. I thought about the people waiting for this load, how fresh vegetables made their way from farms to their tables. The miles rolled by, and soon the day was heading toward evening. The sky turned soft shades of orange and pink, the sun setting behind the hills. I found a safe spot at a truck stop near Dayton to park for the night. I climbed out of the cab, my legs stiff after hours in the seat. The air was cool and fresh, and the smell of diesel and rain lingered. I checked the load again, walked around the truck to make sure everything was secure. The trailer doors were locked tight, and the crates inside were safe and dry. That night, I slept in the truck's bunk. The sounds of other trucks and the distant hum of traffic surrounded me, but inside the cab, it was quiet and safe. I was ready for the final leg of the trip tomorrow. Morning came cold and clear. The air was crisp, and the roads were dry for the first time in a day. I started the engine, feeling the power beneath me. The route took me past farms waking up to the new day, fields of corn and soy stretching wide under the blue sky. I passed small towns with their quiet streets and old buildings. The road was smooth, and the miles came easy. As I neared Cleveland, the traffic picked up. Trucks, cars, and delivery vans filled the roads. I focused on keeping my lane steady and watching my mirrors. The city's skyline came into view, tall buildings reaching up against the sky. I knew I was close. I checked my GPS and found the warehouse where the load was going. The route took me through busy streets, past traffic lights and intersections. Finally, I arrived at the loading dock. The workers were ready, and I pulled the rig into position. They started unloading the crates carefully, stacking them for delivery to stores. I watched, making sure everything was handled properly. The fresh produce looked good, no signs of damage from the long drive. I felt a quiet satisfaction knowing this load would help feed people in the city. After the unloading was done, I filled out the paperwork and checked the truck one last time. The trailer was empty now, and I felt the weight lifted from the rig. The sun was high, shining warm and bright. I took a moment to stretch and breathe in the city air. The trip had been long and tiring, but everything went smoothly. No surprises, no accidents, just the steady work of driving and delivering. I climbed back into the cab, ready to start the next job. The road ahead was waiting, full of miles and stories yet to come. But for now, I felt good knowing I had done my part. The rig rumbled to life, and I pulled away from the dock, heading toward the next destination, the highway stretching out ahead like a promise. That day, I was reminded that trucking isn't just about driving. It's about being part of a chain that keeps the world moving. It's hard work, long hours, and sometimes lonely roads. But it's honest work, and when you see the results at the end, it's worth every mile. I was hauling a load from Texas to the Midwest, a long run that would take me through small towns and stretches of highway where the only thing you see for miles is flat land and sky. The cargo was nothing special, a shipment of machinery parts for a factory up north, but it was the kind of trip that tests you in quiet ways. You spend hours alone, just you, your rig, and the endless road ahead. I started early in the morning before the sun was up, when the air still held that sharp chill. The truck's engine rumbled steadily beneath me, the familiar vibrations calming, almost like a heartbeat I could count on. I liked the quiet hours. Fewer cars, less noise, a chance to focus. I checked the mirrors and the load one more time at the stop before I hit the interstate. Everything locked down tight, no surprises. Safety was always on my mind. I've seen too many close calls to ever get careless. The highway stretched ahead, straight and wide, cutting through the plains like a ribbon. There's something about those long stretches that makes your thoughts wander. The scenery moving past in slow waves of green and brown. I kept an eye on the gauges, the RPMs, the fuel, always making sure my rig was in good shape. The road was smooth, and the weather was clear, the sky a pale blue that slowly grew brighter as the sun climbed. Around midday, I stopped at a truck stop to refuel and grab some food. The place was busy with other truckers, but I kept to myself, knowing the clock was ticking. I wasn't just racing against time. I was racing against the clock of how long I could keep my body alert and ready. Long hauls can wear you down if you're not careful. I filled the tank, checked my oil and tires, and grabbed a sandwich from the counter. The food was nothing special, just a cold sandwich and a soda, but it was enough to keep me going. Back on the road, I settled into a rhythm. The sun was high now, beating down through the windshield and warming the cab. I cracked the window a little for fresh air, the smell of dry grass and dust mixing with the scent of diesel. I could see other trucks in the distance, some coming toward me, others moving away. It felt like we were all part of some quiet, endless dance, each of us carrying our own burdens. As I passed through a small town, I noticed the road narrowing. Construction signs popped up, orange cones lined the shoulder, and workers waved flags. I slowed down and took extra care. The trucks behind me honked impatiently, but safety came first. The roadwork lasted a few miles, with rough patches and gravel, making the ride bumpier. I could feel the rig shifting under me, and I kept my hands steady on the wheel. After the construction, the road opened back up, smooth and clear again. I pushed the accelerator a bit, trying to make up for lost time. The sun was dipping lower now, casting long shadows over the fields. I knew I still had a couple hundred miles to go before my stop for the night, and the hours of driving ahead would stretch into darkness. Night driving always changes things. The headlights cut through the dark, but beyond the beams, everything disappeared into black. The quiet hum of the engine and the steady rhythm of the tires on the pavement became sharper, more focused. I had to be extra alert, scanning the road for any signs of trouble. Wildlife crossing, broken down vehicles, anything unexpected. Fatigue was the enemy, but I kept my mind sharp, reminding myself why I do this job. The temperature dropped as the night grew colder. I turned on the heater to keep the cab warm, but the chill still found its way inside. I pulled my jacket tighter around me and kept my eyes on the road. The radio played soft music quietly in the background, just enough to keep me company without distracting me. Around 2 a.m., I saw a car pulled over on the side of the highway, hazard lights blinking. It looked like the driver was having trouble. I slowed down and kept a safe distance but stayed alert. The road was straight and empty except for that one vehicle, which seemed stranded. I watched as a man walked up and down the side, looking frustrated but unharmed. I kept moving, knowing I couldn't stop in a place like that safely with my big rig. I hoped he'd get help soon. As the night wore on, I finally reached my planned rest stop. I pulled off the highway onto a well-lit lot, parking the truck in a designated spot. I shut down the engine, and the sudden silence was almost shocking after all those hours of noise. I climbed down from the cab and stretched my legs, feeling the stiffness from sitting so long. The air was crisp and cold, and I took a deep breath, letting it clear my mind. Before heading inside to the driver's lounge, I walked around the truck, inspecting the tires, the trailer, and the locking mechanisms again. I knew the safety checks might seem like a habit, but they were vital. Every time I make a stop, I had to be sure my load was secure and my truck was ready for the next leg. Inside, I found a small table, poured myself a cup of coffee, and took a moment to relax. The lounge was quiet except for a few other drivers like me, some already asleep, others reading or using their phones. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes for a moment, thinking about the road ahead. The plan was to get a few hours of rest before starting again early in the morning. I knew I had a long drive still to complete, but I also knew the importance of taking care of myself. Driving tired wasn't worth the risk, not just for me but for everyone else out there. The next morning, I woke up feeling better. The sleep helped clear the fog in my head. I did one more full inspection of the truck and load before hitting the road again. The sun was rising, painting the sky in soft pinks and oranges. The world felt fresh, alive, like a new chance to keep moving forward. The rest of the trip went smoothly. I kept a steady pace, watching the miles tick by. I made sure to stay hydrated and eat light meals to keep my energy steady. The last stretch took me through rolling hills and patches of forest, a change from the flat plains earlier in the trip. It was beautiful in its own way, and I appreciated the shift in scenery. Finally, I arrived at the delivery point just before noon. I parked the rig and began the unloading process. The dock workers checked the cargo and gave me the thumbs up. Everything arrived safe and sound. That moment of completion, after days on the road, is always satisfying. It means the hard work paid off and the job was done right. I did one last check of the paperwork, signed off, and started planning my route back home. As I climbed back into the cab, I felt the weight of the journey lift a little. Driving a truck isn't just about moving things from one place to another. It's about responsibility, attention, and endurance. It's long hours, sometimes lonely, but it's honest work. I started the engine, shifted into gear, and pulled away from the dock. The road was waiting again, endless and open, but this time I was headed home. I was hauling a load from Texas up to the Midwest, a long stretch of highway that cut through endless fields and small towns that looked like they hadn't changed much in decades. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink, and the road was quiet except for the hum of my rig's engine and the steady rhythm of the tires on the asphalt. I always liked this part of the trip, when the world felt still and I could just focus on the road ahead, the miles ticking by one after the other. The truck was a beast, an old Freightliner I'd been driving for years. It wasn't the newest or the fanciest, but it ran solid and felt like an extension of me when I was behind the wheel. The load was simple, pallets of machinery parts, nothing fragile but expensive enough that I had to be careful not to slam on the brakes or jerk the steering too hard. I kept a steady speed, somewhere between 60 and 65 miles per hour, just enough to make good time but not so fast that I risked trouble. As I drove, I passed a few other trucks, some heading the other way, some pulling off at exits or rest stops. There was a rhythm to it, a kind of quiet brotherhood on the road that didn't need words. We all knew the rules, the dangers, the long hours. We respected the space each other needed. Around midday, I pulled off at a truck stop just past a small town in Oklahoma. The place was packed. Other drivers grabbing food, stretching their legs, or just sitting in their rigs, waiting for their next assignment. I parked my rig in a corner spot and went inside to grab a quick sandwich and some coffee. The diner was a little worn down, the kind of place that had seen better days but still had a warm, lived-in feel. The walls were decorated with old photos of trucks and highways, and the smell of frying bacon and fresh coffee filled the air. I sat at the counter, ate my sandwich slowly, and watched the other drivers come and go. Most of them kept to themselves, just like me. Trucking was a solitary job for the most part, and I liked it that way. The quiet helped me think. Back on the road, the afternoon light was harsh and bright. I kept my eyes on the road, scanning for anything unusual. Driving a big rig means always watching for the little things. A sudden stop ahead, a loose load on a trailer, a sharp turn you have to slow for. On a straight highway, it's easy to get complacent, but I always reminded myself to stay sharp. About 2 hours later, near dusk, I started feeling tired. The miles had been long, and my body ached from sitting in the same position. I knew I needed to find a place to stop for the night. The plan was to rest at a way station that was open 24/7, somewhere near the Kansas border. I pulled off the highway, checked my maps on the dashboard, and made my way to the way station entrance. The way station was quiet and mostly empty. A few trucks were parked under dim lights, their drivers getting some sleep before hitting the road again. I backed my rig into a spot near the far end and shut down the engine. The sudden silence was almost jarring after hours of steady noise. I stretched out my legs and climbed out of the cab. The cool evening air felt good on my skin, and I took a deep breath. Inside the cab, I set my alarm for 4 hours and laid down on the bunk. The mattress wasn't the most comfortable, but after a long day, I was out cold in minutes. When the alarm went off, I felt groggy but better. I started the engine, did my pre-trip check, and got back on the road. The night was dark but clear, the highway lit only by the headlights and the occasional glow of distant towns. As I drove through the night, the world outside seemed different. The silence was deeper, and the air colder. Sometimes I saw headlights in the distance, but mostly it was just me and the endless ribbon of road. The truck's cab was warm, and I had a radio playing softly, just enough to keep me company without distracting me. Hours passed, the landscape changing subtly as I crossed state lines. By early morning, I was close to my destination, a warehouse on the outskirts of a city in Illinois. The sun was just starting to peek over the horizon again. I pulled up to the loading dock, ready to unload the pallets and finish my delivery. The warehouse workers were already there, moving efficiently, guiding me into place. Unloading went smoothly. The forklift operators were professional, careful with the machinery parts, and we worked together like a well-oiled machine. Once everything was off the trailer, I double-checked my paperwork and prepared for the return trip. The delivery was on time, and the load intact, no surprises. Before leaving, I grabbed a coffee from the small shop inside the warehouse. It was the kind of break that felt good after hours on the road. I stretched my legs outside, feeling the cool morning air on my face. The city was waking up, cars starting to fill the streets, people rushing to work. It was a different world from the long stretches of empty highway I'd been driving through. Driving back, I reflected on the trip. It was a typical run, nothing flashy or dramatic, but it reminded me of why I liked trucking. The freedom, the solitude, the challenge. Every trip had its own rhythm, its own story, even if it wasn't always obvious at first. The highway demanded respect and focus, but it also gave a chance to see parts of the country few others did. When I finally pulled into the yard after the return trip, I shut down the engine and climbed down from the cab. The sun was high in the sky now, and the day was warm. I checked the truck over one last time, making sure everything was in order for the next load. It was a job that required care and responsibility, but I took pride in it. The rig was my tool, my livelihood, and my companion on the long, lonely road. That day, like many others, ended with a sense of satisfaction. The miles behind me were proof of work done well. I locked up the truck and headed home, ready to rest and prepare for the next trip. The road would be waiting tomorrow, and I'd be ready to face it again. Steady hands on the wheel, eyes on the horizon, and a mind clear and focused on the road ahead. I was rolling down a long stretch of highway somewhere in the middle of nowhere, my rig humming steadily under me. The early morning light was just starting to spread across the sky, turning the horizon a soft pink and orange. The road was mostly empty except for the occasional car or truck passing by. I had been on the road for hours, hauling a load of building materials from Texas to Michigan. The miles seemed endless, and my mind wandered through the usual thoughts a long-haul trucker has. The next rest stop, the weather ahead, the delivery schedule, and the small comforts waiting at home. But this trip had a strange feeling to it, one I couldn't quite put my finger on. The rig itself felt solid beneath me. My old Kenworth had been my partner for years now, and though it showed signs of age, it never let me down. The cab was cluttered with little reminders of home. A faded photo of my daughter taped near the dashboard, a worn baseball cap hanging on a hook, and a thermos that had seen better days but still kept my coffee hot. The scent of diesel and leather filled the cab, mixed with the faint smell of pine air freshener. The highway stretched straight ahead, lined by thick forests on both sides. The trees looked dark and dense, shadows creeping across the road. The sun was rising steadily, but the light had not yet fully reached the ground. The temperature was cool. The windows cracked open just enough to let in fresh air without causing too much noise. The steady vibration of the engine was comforting, like the heartbeat of a machine alive and working in tune with me. Suddenly, my eyes caught something unusual in the distance. At the edge of the road, there was a car pulled over, its hazard lights blinking faintly. I slowed down a bit as I passed by, curiosity mixed with caution. The car looked older, the paint chipped and faded. No one was visible inside or around it. I kept driving, the image lingering in my mind, though I didn't think much of it. It wasn't uncommon to see stranded vehicles on highways like this. Hours went by and the landscape began to change. The trees gave way to open fields and rolling hills, dotted with small farms and old barns. The roads narrowed and winded through the countryside. I checked my fuel gauge and decided I would stop soon for a refill and a short break. I spotted a small gas station tucked beside the road, its pumps looking worn but functional. I pulled in, parked the rig, and stepped out into the cool morning air. The silence around the station was thick, almost too quiet, the kind of quiet you notice only when you stop moving. I filled up the tank, checked the tires, and grabbed a cold drink from the small store inside. The cashier was a middle-aged man who barely glanced up as I paid. The whole place had a forgotten feel, like it hadn't seen much traffic lately. Back on the road, I felt a slight sense of unease, though I tried to shake it off. The miles were stretching behind me, but the destination was still far ahead. As afternoon approached, the weather began to change. Dark clouds rolled in from the west, thickening and blocking out the sun. A strong wind picked up, causing the rig to sway slightly on the highway. I adjusted my speed and kept both hands firmly on the wheel. The rain came down hard, pounding on the windshield like a drum. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. The wipers worked overtime, but the heavy sheets of water blurred everything outside. I had to slow down significantly, my eyes scanning the road and mirrors constantly. The headlights of other vehicles were smeared by the rain, appearing as glowing smudges in the gloom. Then, just ahead, the highway curved sharply. I could barely see the turn until I was almost on it. I eased into the bend, the tires slipping slightly on the wet pavement. The rig groaned as I fought the steering wheel, fighting the pull of the wind and slick road. For a moment, I felt the familiar adrenaline surge, the sharp focus that comes when everything is on the line. The trailer swayed, but I managed to keep it steady. After the curve, the rain began to ease. The clouds thinned a bit, and the sun tried to break through. I pulled over at a rest area to catch my breath and check the rig for any damage. Everything seemed fine, but I could feel the tension still lingering in my muscles. Later, as night fell, I found a truck stop to park for the night. I was tired, the kind of bone-deep tired that comes from hours of concentration and the constant battle with the elements. I climbed out of the cab and stretched, feeling the cold night air hit my face. The parking lot was full of other rigs, each with their own stories and journeys. Inside the diner, the smell of fried food and strong coffee wrapped around me like a familiar blanket. I ordered a meal, sitting alone at a booth by the window, watching trucks come and go. The chatter and noise of the place was comforting after the long silence on the road. Before heading back to the cab, I took a moment to check my schedule and the weather for tomorrow. The forecast showed clearer skies and mild temperatures. I felt a small relief knowing the worst of the storm was behind me. That night, I slept soundly in the small bunk of my truck, the engine ticking softly as it cooled down. I dreamed of open roads, the steady rhythm of tires on asphalt, and the quiet peace that comes with the miles behind the wheel. The next morning, I hit the road again, the rig running smoothly and the sky bright with promise. The The strange feelings from the day before had faded. I focused on the road ahead, the weight of the load balanced beneath me, and the steady hum of the engine as my only company. I knew there would be more long days and hard nights ahead, but that was the life I had chosen. A life on the highway, moving forward mile by mile, toward the next destination, the next stop, and the next story waiting to unfold. The road was empty when I started my run early in the morning. The sky was still dark, with just a hint of orange starting to creep on the horizon. I had my coffee in a thermos, the smell strong and bitter, just how I like it. The cab of my truck was warm and familiar, filled with the faint smell of leather seats and a little dust from all the miles. My rig was an older Freightliner, tough and reliable, and I trusted it more than anything else on the road. I was hauling a load of steel coils from a plant in Ohio to a construction site down in Texas. The weight was heavy, and the coils were strapped tight to keep them from shifting. I double-checked every strap, every chain, making sure nothing would go wrong during the long haul. The steel was valuable, and if anything happened to the load, it would mean trouble not just for me, but for the company and the contractors waiting on it. The highway stretched ahead like a long ribbon, and I settled into the rhythm of the road. The engine hummed steadily beneath me as I kept my eyes on the road and my hands steady on the wheel. My job was simple: get the load there safely and on time. But it was never just about driving. It was about paying attention to every little detail, weather, traffic, the condition of the truck, and sometimes the people you passed along the way. The first few hours went smooth. The sky brightened, and the early morning mist started to clear. I passed through small towns, watching the local life unfold as people started their day. Farms with tractors in the fields, old diners opening their doors, and the occasional deer crossing the roadside. I always respected the quiet moments like these. They reminded me that life went on outside the cab, even while I was locked into my route and schedule. Around midday, I pulled into a rest stop near Arkansas to stretch my legs and grab some food. The parking lot was filled with other trucks, and the sound of engines idling mixed with the occasional shout from drivers talking about the road ahead. I checked my truck again, making sure the load was still secure. It never failed to amaze me how much trust you had to put in those straps and chains. One loose link could spell disaster. Back on the road, the weather started to change. Dark clouds rolled in from the west, and I could feel the wind picking up. I kept an eye on the sky, knowing that storms could turn a simple drive into a dangerous challenge. It wasn't long before the rain began. At first just a light drizzle, then turning into a steady downpour that blurred the windshield and made the road slick. I slowed down and turned on the wipers full blast. Even with all the caution, the road was slippery, and I had to be extra careful not to let the heavy load swing or slide. The hours passed slowly, but the rain didn't let up. I could hear it pounding on the roof of the cab, a steady drumbeat that made the trip feel endless. The truck's tires hissed on the wet pavement, and I kept my distance from the cars ahead. The highway was less crowded now, but I was alert to every sound and movement. In bad weather, accidents happen fast, and it was my job to avoid being part of one. Late in the afternoon, the storm finally passed. The sky opened up to reveal a clear, darkening blue, and the air smelled fresh and clean. The sun was low now, casting long shadows across the road. I was tired, but there was still a good stretch left to go before I could call it a day. I pulled into a truck stop just before sunset, ready to refuel and get some rest. The diesel pump hissed as I filled the tank, and I took a moment to look over the truck. The load was still secure, the tires looked good, and the engine was running smooth. It was one of those moments when you feel a little pride in your work. A long day on the road, but everything holding together like it should. Inside the truck stop, the smell of food and the buzz of other drivers filled the air. I grabbed a quick bite and settled in to plan the rest of the trip. The last leg would take me across Texas through some winding roads and small towns. I knew I had to stay focused, especially with the heavy steel coils in the back. The next morning, I was back on the road just as the sun rose. The heat was starting to build, and the Texas landscape stretched out wide and dry. The long stretches of highway rolled past, and I kept my mind sharp. Trucking wasn't just about driving. It was about constant awareness. Every turn, every hill, every stop mattered. As I drove, I noticed a small problem, a slight wobble in the trailer. I pulled over at a safe spot and got out to check. The straps looked tight, but one of the trailer's tires had a slow leak. It wasn't flat yet, but it needed attention fast. I grabbed my tire gauge and air compressor from the truck's toolbox and got to work. I aired it up enough to keep going but knew I had to get to a mechanic soon. The delay cost me some time, but safety came first. I called the dispatcher and explained the situation. They arranged for a service stop ahead, and I adjusted my schedule. It was frustrating, but in trucking, these things happen. You learn to handle problems as they come and keep moving forward. By late afternoon, I finally rolled into the delivery site. The sun was low, casting a warm golden light over the construction area. I backed the trailer into place with care, making sure the spot was level and the ground stable. The steel coils would be unloaded by a crane, and I watched as the workers carefully lifted each coil off the trailer. It was a satisfying end to a long trip. The load was intact, the truck still running strong, and I had done my job well. I checked the paperwork, signed off on the delivery, and headed to the office to report in. The dispatcher told me to take the night off and rest before the next run. That night, as I settled into a motel bed, I thought about the day's drive. It wasn't glamorous or exciting, but it was real. It was about responsibility, hard work, and the steady rhythm of miles rolling under big wheels. The road had tested me, but I had met every challenge without trouble. The next day, I would get back on the highway again. But for now, I was content. The truck was parked, the load delivered, and the day's work behind me. That was trucking, the long road, the steady grind, and the simple satisfaction of a job done right.